Hi, my name is Chris Brennan, and you're listening to the Astrology Podcast. This episode is recorded on Thursday. Is it Thursday, guys?
It is Thursday.
It sure
Thursday.
is.
Okay. Thursday, October 11th, 2018, starting at 3:20 p.m. in Denver, Colorado, and this is the 175th episode of the show. For more information about how to subscribe to the podcast and help support the production of future episodes by becoming a patron, please visit theastrologypodcast.com/subscribe. In this episode, I'm going to be talking with astrologers Kelly Surtees and Coppock about the signs of the Zodiac. And this is going to be part one of our two-part series where we're going to go through and talk about the qualities associated with each of the signs. So in this episode, we're going to do the first 6 signs of the Zodiac, Aries through Virgo. And then in the follow-up episode, we'll do the rest of the signs probably next month. So hey guys, thanks for joining me today.
Hey, thanks for having us.
Welcome back. We had a little pre-show chat, got a little warmed up, and I think we're in good spirits today. So this is something we've been meaning to do for a while. Thanks a lot for joining me for this. We've got a big task in front of us to do all 12 signs, but we're going to try and tackle the first 6 today, I think.
Yes, just half.
That is the plan.
I have actually been, I'm 4 months into doing my horoscope column over the past few months, the video horoscopes. And do you guys ever, towards about halfway through that process, really start cursing whoever decided that there should be 12 signs of the Zodiac rather than some more manageable number of like 4 or 5?
Like 5.
Right.
Yeah, 12 is it takes a while to get used to the fact that 12 is substantial and it's more marathon than sprint. You got to keep your momentum up.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I will jump around instead of just doing them in order. I'll be like, okay. I don't feel like writing that Sag one. I'll jump to Pisces. Sometimes I do them backwards. Sometimes I'll do the first 6 from Aries to Virgo, and then I'll do the next 6 from Pisces to Libra, so they meet in the middle. Just anything to, I don't know, keep it interesting.
That's smart. I like that. I would only worry that I would wake up one night and realize I forgot to write one for like Libra like a month later or something like that.
I'm in awe, Austin, that you bounced. I'm like, I've thought about that. Like, should I do a different sign? And then I've just, obviously something, and so I just do them in order every time. And I just get very happy when I get to Pisces, which I always find the easiest one to write, probably for personal reasons.
Yeah.
You know, who knows why. It's not like you
I
had
don't know
anything
why
there.
that is. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know that it's any glorious innovation. It's just, it's just my undiagnosed ADD.
Yeah, your lack of rule following.
Sure. So, so we'll get into that. Well, that's actually an issue because we're going to go through these in order. We're going to start with Aries, right? We're not doing any jumping around today?
No.
No.
Not today.
Okay. All right.
But we're going to start with some basics first, right?
Yeah, so this is exciting because this is kind of a follow-up where we did one really great, really amazing, like foundational episode on the 7, the significations or the meanings in astrology of the 7 traditional planets like a couple of years ago. And
I totally forgot about that episode.
That was a really good, we did a really amazing foundational discussion, and people always talk to me about that episode and always refer back to it because for a lot of people, the podcast is something they're finding pretty early on in their studies. And so we've really been teaching people astrology and teaching people the basics. So this is a good continuation of that where we did the planets basically, and now it's time to talk about one of the other, really fundamental factors of astrology, of course, which is the signs of the Zodiac and the meanings or the qualities that astrologers associate with those signs. So very quickly, before we get into that, one of the things we were talking about before we got started is how all 3 of us sort of have a very similar approach to astrology. And that might be like relevant context where each of us started off as modern astrologers, then we learned traditional or older forms of astrology, and then all 3 of us have kind of naturally developed a sort of very similar synthesis of modern and traditional astrology at this point, I think, right?
Yeah. I think so. And it is an interesting point that our individual lineage or pathways is that we did start with modern first. So our experience is actually different from people who are coming into astrology now and starting with traditional or older forms of astrology first. But just because, not to say one's better or worse, it's just it is different. The information is being layered in different ways.
Right.
Yeah, definitely. I would say, yeah, I started, my first references were the Noel Till books, but I didn't have a teacher. And so I
Oh,
really just sat with the diagrams. I was just like sitting with, okay, these are the signs, these are the modes, these are the elements, these planets rule here, exalted here. And I was just kind of sitting with the diagrams until Chris invited me down to Project Hindsight in 2006. And that was like, and here's a bunch of new stuff. But yeah, I would say that my initial education was sitting alone with the diagrams and doing hit and miss chart readings for people for $5. That was my school.
it's
Right.
actually a really good school.
Yeah, worked for me. I guess that was the pedagogical method that I needed, or at least
Yeah, the
deserved.
immersion style.
Did you study with anyone, Kelly, or did you do
Yeah,
self-study?
I the self-study for sure, but I was very young when I started studying astrology by myself. I was like 11 years old,
Okay.
and I would sit under the big maple tree we had in my parents' front yard, and we had a deck, and I just loved reading outside. So I had my astrology book, and I remember reading things like try to memorize. Aries is a cardinal fire sign. Aries is a sign of independence. Like very rote learning, but some of the basics you just got to get those keywords in. And then, fast forward to 7 or 8 years later, and I did have a teacher who was very psychotherapeutic, but also had this weird connection to India because she was from, I think, the Sannyasin Indian or Sannyasin faith of some kind to do with a particular temple in part of India. So it was very modern, but very soulful at the same time. And I studied with her for a couple of years to get, all the basic sort of modern techniques, if you like, and then dived into learning some of the older techniques through going to conferences and hearing lectures by people that I was like, oh, that's really interesting. And funnily enough, then my teacher started to get into some of the older stuff. So we would chit chat back and forward about that.
Oh, that's cool.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And for me, I was self-taught for the first 4 years of my study, just reading largely just different astrology books and reading a ton of modern astrology books, and then went to Kepler and ended up sort of being forced to study traditional astrology and getting into it through that route.
Yeah.
As
I
I
love that you were forced and look where you
right,
are now.
I actually just I finished writing the foreword to Dimitra George's new book on Hellenistic astrology just a few weeks ago and submitted it. And I'm excited about that since she was my introduction to Hellenistic astrology. And that's going to be a great book. And it's nice, yeah, being able to write the foreword and have a full circle type experience.
That's really beautiful. And I had something similar a couple of years ago where one of those first astrology books that I read way back was by an astrologer named Shirley Soffer. And I just assumed that she wouldn't sort of be in this world anymore. But I met her at a SOTA conference about 2 years ago. And it was like meeting your astrological rock star because
Right.
just her very simple astrology source book had helped get me started.
Sure.
So it's lovely when you get that link.
Yeah, definitely. So all right, so let's get into, we're going to talk about the qualities of the signs of the zodiac. And one of the things I think we talked about briefly that's probably applicable and worth reiterating here that we talked about in the planets episode is one of the issues is astrology is based on, or a large part of the underlying presumption I feel like with astrology is there's this underlying idea that things called, or that we often label as archetypes exist. And that with the planets, that's really easy to see where there's some like overarching notion of what that planet means, but it can't be articulated. You can't find a word that perfectly encapsulates everything a planet means in astrology and all the significations it has. So what you end up doing is talking about many different ways that it can manifest in different contexts. And so that's what we did with the planet series. And I feel like that's kind of what we're going to end up doing a little bit with the signs of the zodiac as well, which also have sort of archetypal dynamics or archetypal energies. So is that an appropriate way to sort of contextualize this? Or how do you guys feel about that? Is that too psychological sounding?
Well, no, I mean, it depends. So we're not just talking about archetypes in a strictly in your head sense. We're talking about metaphysical or reality archetypes,
Mm.
right? And so as long as we're using, a slightly more platonic version of archetypes and a slightly less exclusively depth psychology definition of archetypes. I would say this, quasi Platonist idea includes the psychological, right? Because if they exist everywhere, they also exist in your head, but they also exist outside of your head, or else you couldn't do events with astrology. You could only do experiences. But yeah, once you approach, and the more you understand the essence of a sign or a planet, you can articulate what it looks like in any and every context, right? Which is thousands and thousands of words. I think of some of the older texts, like in particular, I'm thinking of Al-Biruni, where it's like, okay, in terms of places, Scorpio is a swamp. In terms of people, Scorpio is this. In terms of stones, Scorpio is this. In terms of body parts, Scorpio is, it's the same, archetype, for lack of a better term, as it manifests in every different area you can think of. And you can find that archetype in anything that you can think of.
Right. So we will talk about sometimes the psychological manifestations or like the character associations with the signs of the zodiac, but the discussion won't necessarily be limited to that. And even when we do go into character traits or other things like that we're associating with the signs, that has to be understood as like a character or psychological manifestation of the archetype, and that could be interchangeable with a more literal manifestation as well.
Absolutely. And we should probably talk about some of those as well. What do Aries events look like in a life? What is an Aries personality? What is an Aries health problem?
Right.
Yeah, these are really good. Even the health problems, I really like that. What are and how can you sort of almost diagnose without necessarily knowing exactly the astrology, but when you know the symptoms, you can be like, that looks and feels like an Aries thing, or that's more like a Taurus thing.
Yep.
Yeah.
Right. Or like an event chart, like an electional chart. Like what does a Aries rising, like wedding electional chart look like versus what does
I had a couple contact me years ago, and they were contemplating getting married in the middle of competing in a sporting event. And I was like, that sounds a little bit like an Aries themed wedding.
That's great.
Right? I was like, that's different, but that would fit this tone, basically. And of course, the two of them had lots of fire planets in their chart or what have you. So it was very relevant for them.
Totally. I love that. All right.
Yeah.
Well, so we were going to start by first talking about, when we go through each of the signs of the zodiac, one of the things that I talk about in my book, Hellenistic Astrology, The Study of Fate and Fortune, available in fine bookstores everywhere, is that the signs of the zodiac in the Western astrological tradition, there's really 4 primary qualities that are associated with each of the signs of the zodiac, from which all of their other significations are derived from. And this is the gender of the sign of the zodiac, which is masculine or feminine. This is the modality, or what's sometimes called quadruplicity, which is cardinal, fixed, or mutable. It's also, the third quality is the element, or triplicity, which is earth, air, fire, and water. And then finally, the fourth primary quality or property associated with each sign is the planetary ruler, such as Mars being associated with Aries, Venus with Taurus, and so on and so forth. So those are the 4, I think, primary qualities that are going to be overlapping qualities that are unique to each of the signs of the zodiac that we're going to expand on a little bit as we go through this.
Well, I would just jump in and add that the image is also a primary quality. Each of them has an image, and much is done with those images, both traditionally and contemporarily. That an image is a different form of category than ruling planet or division into 2, 3, or 4. But image, I would say, at least for my part, I would say image is one of those fundamental categories.
Let's talk about that, because that's actually something I've struggled with conceptually, because the image is originally, at least theoretically, derived from the constellation, but within our context, for the 3 of us, we're actually going to be talking about the tropical zodiac, which is no longer aligned with or no longer associated with the constellations, and therefore some of those images still carry over. So you would be not associating with the constellation, but you're talking about the image as being maybe inspired by or still relevant in terms of its overall like archetypal significance in some way.
Absolutely. And if we're talking about the association of images with constellations, you can make an excellent case that none of those star clusters actually look anything like any of the images,
Hmm.
and that the association, or that you could pick 100 other things that fit those star clusters just as well, and that those images are actually archetypal images that people intuitively or through whatever method associated with that system of 12, and that it's actually a system of archetypal images which were pinned to stars and can be equally as well pinned to the division of 12 with the tropical zodiac. Because, dude, if you look up, Aries doesn't look like a ram.
No.
Cancer doesn't look anything like a crab. Maybe Scorpio looks a little bit. Scorpio might be the best fit, but it's not like you look up and you're like, that's totally a water bearer.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. There's a lot of that idea of the forms and causes of things, like the essence of something, the expression of it. It's not, I agree in that idea that it's not meant to be a literal thing. It's meant to be the symbolic or something to evoke the essence of.
Sure. And that almost then also extends to the glyph, or I don't know how much you guys extend that to the glyph. Like with the planets, that's a little bit easier because the planetary glyphs, even though they may have been developed much later, the glyphs, the symbols that we use for the planets were developed much later than the meanings were. Maybe the symbols that are used for the signs of the zodiac may also be relevant images to some extent in terms of understanding the symbolism of the sign.
Yeah, they can definitely use them as keys.
Sure.
Mm.
All right. So we'll talk about those or touch on those a little bit as well. Okay. Do we want to say anything else, or do you guys want to say anything about those other four qualities, though? Gender, modality, element, and then planetary ruler before we jump into our first sign of the zodiac?
Yeah. So, what I would just say, that I tend to refer to the gender as polarity, just because, I don't know, we're in an age where we're kind of rethinking masculine and feminine. Those are really loaded terms, and I think you can get to exactly what is being pointed to by those terms with just for me, because I've done Chinese martial arts for 20 years. Yin and yang, right? You have an active, yang is active, radiant, assertive, loud, bright, et cetera, et cetera. And then, yin is receptive, reactive, reflective, nurturing, supportive, et cetera, et cetera. And it's the same sort of division of things into, yin and yang, day and night, et cetera, et cetera. I feel like I find that using gender as the lens for exploring polarity is somewhat arbitrary, because we can use other natural polarities to understand exactly the same concept. And also, I've done a bunch of Chinese martial arts, so I've been trained to think in terms of yin and yang.
And Kelly, you also use the same terminology, right? Or prefer that, or do you?
Yeah, I do often refer to yin and yang, or just to try and be clear when I say masculine and feminine, that I'm talking about the archetype or the essence of something that is masculine, which is different or distinct from something that might be male, and then the essence of something that is feminine rather than explicitly female. So it's a little bit maybe splitting hairs on the word choice, but just trying to be really clear. And then, it depends on the group sometimes. Sometimes people are really clear on that distinction. And other times, we'll talk about the yin and yang just to make it really clear that, it's like an introverted tone versus an extroverted tone. So in some ways, it's like there are starting points. I think, Austin, you mentioned the idea of a key. And each of these things, the four factors, each of them is a key or a clue to part of the meaning of the zodiac sign. And the images come into that, the polarities, the elements, the modes, that type of thing. It's because each sign is a unique mix of those factors, and that's part of how we get the meaning. So these are like the absolute basic building blocks, I guess.
Yeah, and
Right.
just to jump in, like we're talking about with sort of the archetype on its own terms versus archetype in a particular context. I feel like the way that yin and yang are used and understood is archetypal, and that when we're talking about human bodies, then yin and yang look like male and female. When
Mm,
we're talking about the rhythm of time, yin and yang are day and night. When we're
mm,
talking about temperature, yin and yang are cold and hot, right?
yeah.
But like the masculine and feminine and the male and the female are um, expressions of yin and yang at particular levels. They are not the essence of the concept of polarity, which is what we are looking for.
Mm,
Right. And in the Western tradition, I mean, one of the things that I explored is that the original philosophical or metaphysical or conceptual motivation for assigning gender was the idea that the odd signs are basically associated with the masculine and the even signs are associated with the feminine. So like ones, for example, are number one, which is Aries, is said to be a masculine sign, and then number two, Taurus, is a feminine sign. So it was that alternation based on
mm,
numerological principles, which is fundamentally that's sort of what you're getting at, Austin, that while it can have a manifestation, a literal manifestation of, let's say, physically like male or female or what have you, it's pointing to there's a deeper underlying principle that's pointing to a deeper underlying metaphysical or numerological symbolism that's there.
Yeah. And so in some cultures, the masculine and feminine might be a perfect way to communicate that. For other cultures, day and night might be the perfect way to communicate that, whatever. But
mm.
I try to get it back to first principles and go from there. But yeah, and it's one of the things that's interesting about the zodiac is that you always have the alternation of yin and yang. It's always, there's no two yangs in a row. There's no two yins in a row. It's
No.
always, yin, yang, yin, or yang, yin, yang, yin, yang, yin. And so that tells us something about the way that the zodiac is describing time, right? That there's a repolarization when anything changes signs, where it goes from active to, supportive or responsive, and then back to active and assertive. And so I think it's also worth just noting, we should probably move on, that two of the elements, fire and air, are both yang because they're active, light, they do stuff. And then water and earth are yin. Water drops down, earth just sits there until it is moved. That is yin, receptive, holding, supportive, nurturing, right? Whereas air is always whipping around and fire is always changing things and moving around. And so the elements and the concept of polarity are inherently married.
Yeah. And because I know, Chris, you listed the four, and Austin, you threw in the images there as well. The only other piece that I do consider, which is not necessarily needing to be in the top four, but it's that idea of the combinations of hot and cold and wet and dry, and how when we alternate, we move from one sign to the next, those sort of core qualities, if you like, change as well. So that's something that usually informs how I'll describe a particular sign.
Which is a
Right.
product of the elements.
It's like the elements are broken into a combination of two of those. So water, for instance, would be a combination of cold and wet, if you like.
And I run into an issue there because there was a break in the tradition where initially they were using the Stoic qualities. So Valens describes, water as wet, I believe,
Hmm.
and air
Primarily
signs,
wet. Yeah.
yeah, and air signs is cold. But that's worth mentioning because then
Yeah.
it flips in the medieval tradition and it becomes they start using Aristotle's qualities so that air is
It's
what,
hot.
moistening.
It's hot and moist are the ones that are typically used.
Right,
Yeah.
and then water is what? Cold?
Cold and moist. Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah.
So that's
But
a
they're both
whole
moist, which was perhaps different from
Yeah, well,
the
we
valence.
we do know that fire is hot and water is wet and earth is dry.
We do.
Sure. Yeah, but those qualities definitely we can get into that. It's so interesting because the three of us we teach different like intro to astrology classes. And so it's interesting having three different teachers come together, even though we all have largely similar approaches, as I said at the beginning, how there will be sometimes like those little minor differences or something. So it's
Yeah,
going to be fun and interesting as we go through this to explore even some of that.
Yeah,
totally.
absolutely. So then there's the three, right? So each sign is divided into modality, or excuse me, each sign is of one mode. There are three modes, and it's I guess one quick way to talk about it is cardinal signs are beginning active energy, also called movable because they get things moving. Fixed signs continue whatever motion. They're momentum signs. They're sustaining signs, and then mutable signs shift things and transform things and adapt. And so this is one of my teaching metaphors is chess game. There are very different strategies and sort of experiences of what is your opening gambit, that's cardinal.
Yep.
What does your mid game look like, that's fixed, and then end game, and that's mutable. And end game, you just have to adapt to however it worked out, and that's a quality that all mutable signs have. They're like, okay, so this is the situation. How do I adapt to this? Whereas cardinals like trying to create a reality, and fixed is either just continuing on with what is, or hopefully continuing the cardinal plan, but you always get to that shift space, which is mutable. And every season in the tropical zodiac, the first third is cardinal, let's get it going. The middle third is fixed, it's still happening. And then the last third is mutable, where the weather's starting to change. That 90-ish, 91-day arc is sort of coming to an end, and you're sort of starting to see what's coming next, but you got to wrap up what's happening, and that's mutable.
Right. And that seasonal, you mentioned the seasons, that seasonal context is how Ptolemy explains it in the
Mm.
second century, explicitly saying that the cardinal signs are at the beginning of the season where there's a sudden shift into a new, you know, temperature and climate and stuff. Like in the northern hemisphere here, we just recently had the fall equinox where suddenly, the days started getting uh, shorter and leaves started changing and everything else. So the cardinal signs being associated with the beginning of the seasons where there's a shift to something new, the fixed signs being associated with the middle of the seasons where you're right in the middle of it and there's not a lot of change. It's just the fullest sort of expression of whatever the quality of that season is. And then finally, the mutable signs at the end where it starts to move from the stability in the first part of the season to getting ready to transition into something new and sort of wrapping up that which is coming to completion.
Yep. And those that sequence is true northern hemisphere, southern hemisphere, etc. You have beginning, middle, and
Yeah.
end of a season, cardinal, fixed,
Fixed and
mutable.
mutable. Yeah.
Right.
No, it's
Go
and
ahead,
that
Kel.
weather metaphor it's this. I use exactly the same story when I teach. The middle season. I'm now that I moved to Canada, I'm like, this is late January and February where it's winter and it's just more winter. There's
Right.
no changing. But in Sydney, that time is just hot and it's all hot. And that's the fix. That's when the sun's going through Aquarius. So it's that consistency. And then in the last month of the season, the weather is just crazy. It's like you could have a really cold day and you could have a really hot day, and that's the mutable period. So
Yeah,
There's
and
an inconsistency to it.
the
yeah,
inconsistency and the variety, if you like.
yep, and a little bit of the next season creeping into this one.
Yeah.
Right. And I would also say the fixed signs, which are between the solstices and equinoxes, are also host to a bunch of festivals like Halloween and
The cross
Samhain.
quarter
It
festivals.
is the
Yeah.
cross quarter, right? Then there's May
Yeah.
Day, Maypoles, and that's the opposite cross quarter in the middle of the spring. And there's
Yeah.
Candlemas and all that. So
And since we mentioned the seasonal thing, we've talked about this before at length on the forecast episodes. I don't know which one, but it's probably come up a few times, but it might be worth mentioning at this point because we're using the tropical zodiac, which of course is indirectly tied in with the seasons because it's based on the equinoxes and the solstices, which then are tied into when the seasons change, when the sun hits those turning points. But it might be worth mentioning that sometimes a lot of the astrology books written in the northern hemisphere sometimes will describe the signs of the zodiac in the context of the specific season that they match with, but that becomes somewhat problematic when you're dealing with charts in the southern hemisphere where the seasons are flipped or reversed. So I know in the past we've talked about how you guys don't necessarily like to tie the signs into the seasons too closely as a result of that, right?
Well, I like to tie them in as tightly as they actually tie in, which is
Through
they,
the quadruplicities or modalities.
well, yeah, because the three modes are it is a three-part act for each season. It's just that Aries isn't spring. Aries is the beginning of that season, which is the beginning of autumn in the southern and spring in the north. And so it is the beginning of a season. It has that energy. But I can't describe it in terms of it getting I can't describe it in terms of spring metaphors, but I can describe it in terms of it's the beginning of a season. It's the beginning of moving away from the equinox, from a point of balance, into a whole nother season, because that's true everywhere.
Mm.
Right.
Yeah, well, and studying in Australia originally, where the seasons are different from the Northern Hemisphere, obviously, we sort of learned the core qualities of Aries and the core qualities of Cardinal, but without having the almost like sometimes when people have learned the seasonal metaphors, that's harder for them to see the nuances between, this is just the essence of Aries. It doesn't have to be
Right.
explicitly spring. This is what, a planet in Aries will do or look like or what have you. So
Was
Yeah,
that something, though, you noticed when you were sometimes reading like astrology books that were written in the northern hemisphere, that people would invoke that metaphor occasionally and it wouldn't necessarily be applicable?
yeah, for sure, for sure. And, one of my brothers is an Aries and he's very true to the type, like the archetype, if you like, or the essence of Aries, even though technically he's not born in the springtime.
yeah.
Sure.
Well,
Such
I
an
mean, what we
Aries.
can say is that Aries begins both spring and fall in different
It
parts of the earth.
begins, yeah, it initiates.
It initiates both at once, right?
Yeah.
Libra begins both at once.
Yeah.
And then it has qualities that are not anchored to that, to the seasons at all, in addition to those which are related to the seasons.
Yeah.
Sure. Okay, so that's the modalities or quadruplicities. We're making great time here
Yeah.
with our little brief 5-minute intro segment.
Yeah.
No, that's fine. I think this is really good. A good setup. So, element or
I
triplicity.
can do elements in 1 minute.
Okay.
Go.
Or
I
less.
dare you.
Okay, so the elements describe different types of matter on a literal level. They also describe how things move, right? Water sinks down. Water, it has volume, it has mass, but it has no shape, right? Water is adaptable. Water is receptive. Anything you pour into the water, drop into it, the water holds. Earth holds its shape, right? Earth is substantial and it holds its shape. Or if an event is earthy, it's solid. It's something that something substantial has happened. Those are the two yin elements. Fire changes things and requires fuel. It puts out the most energy of any of these states of matter, but is therefore the most dependent on fuel and makes the most change. Air constantly moving around, but the changes that it makes are not as substantial and as acute as those of fire. Nonetheless, air is constantly moving, just like fire. Those are the two yang elements.
Nice job.
Okay.
Very good.
Thanks.
Yeah, I love that. So, and we're going to get into different like mutations of that, because there's things like when when we get into the signs of the zodiac, we'll start seeing overlapping qualities and what the difference is between, let's say, Scorpio, which is a water sign, but it's a fixed water sign, and what fixed water looks like or how that manifests versus, let's say, Pisces, which is a water sign, but it's mutable according to its mode or its quadruplicity, and how that manifests a different version of like the water archetype, basically. Yep. Okay.
Absolutely. Shall we
So,
begin?
those are the elements. And then, well, the very last thing is just the planetary ruler.
The planets. Yeah.
And that is something that we don't need to get into hugely. I mean, I think we're going to be using the traditional rulership scheme, so maybe it's worth mentioning that I think
Do
the
you
three of us
think?
use.
I think we probably will.
Do we all agree on this?
I think we are, well, not everyone's on the same page. We are, the three of us
I know the three of
but-
us. Yeah, by we, the three of us.
Yes.
Yeah, the royal we.
The royal we.
So we're going to use that, and that's basically, it's a symmetrical system where you assign the two luminaries to Cancer to the moon and the sun to Leo, and then each of the traditional or the visible planets are assigned to the signs flanking out from there on either side of the two luminaries. So Mercury to Virgo and Gemini, then Venus to the next two signs, then Mars, then Jupiter, and then finally Saturn to the furthest signs from the two luminaries, which is Capricorn and Aquarius. So when we get into the individual signs, we'll talk more about which planet is associated with each sign, because that becomes a major source of meaning for the signs of the zodiac as well, which planet is associated with it.
Yeah, and that'll be, the three changes, if our listeners are more modern in their training, are for Pisces, which is traditionally ruled by Jupiter, Scorpio, which is traditionally ruled by Mars, and Aquarius, which is traditionally ruled by Saturn. So we'll talk a lot more about those particular iterations, I guess, in part 2, but we will talk about the planets as they relate to the first 6 signs today.
Right, that's an interesting point, because all of those are in the second half of the sign, so we won't even really get to fully deal with that until that point, until the second part.
Yeah. We'll be able to do the comparison, the Mercury comparison today, because we have both Mercury signs in the first half of the zodiac.
Excellent. Cool. All right. Well, I think we are ready then. Our little warm-up is, I think, complete. So why don't we get into the very first sign of the zodiac? And this is the sign that's always traditionally been more or less labeled as the first sign of the zodiac. And, the actual typical reason for that is usually, again, due to the Northern Hemisphere centric development of Western astrology. I think part of that rationale originally was that it was because it's the sign that coincides with the vernal equinox, which is the start of it is the first day of spring in the Northern Hemisphere, where everything starts growing and developing. So I don't know if there's any other objective reason to start with Aries as the first sign of the zodiac other than that, or do you have one?
I think historically it was primarily a Persian thing. And that was part of that's sort of a quiet Persian contribution. That may have been inherited from earlier Mesopotamian protocols, but I believe that starting with the Aries equinox, or starting with Aries because of the vernal equinox, is Persian in origin. The Egyptians started with Cancer, because that's when the flooding of the Nile happened. But you can make a good argument for quote unquote beginning at pretty much either of the solstices or either of the equinoxes.
Sure.
Yeah, I think one of the other pieces that comes into Aries as the beginning is that part of the reason the Persians perhaps did that is that that's actually when they celebrated their New Year festival. And so it wasn't just like the start of spring necessarily. I mean, maybe that's why they had their New Year then. But even in the UK, up until the late 18th century, I think, they actually celebrated New Year on that March equinox. So there's a lot of celebrations, even distinct from astrology and Aries specifically, that talk about a new year starting or a new beginning at that time of year in March.
Yeah, and I don't think that anything about Aries needs to be the first in order for its symbolism to be its symbolism. I'm a big fan of the Thema Mundi variant, where the circle starts, with Cancer rising.
Right.
Yeah.
So in the mythical birth chart for the birth of the world, it was used as like a teaching tool in Hellenistic astrology. It had Cancer rising as the first house, and Aries was actually the 10th house.
Right. Because where do we start? We start by being born of the mother, Cancer.
Beautiful.
Sure. So, and that's worth mentioning then as one last precursor, which is one other theoretical construct that we could use that I don't think we're probably going to use, or that the three of us don't usually employ, is the modern sort of interchangeability between signs and houses, where
Boo.
sometimes in the past few decades it's become popular to associate Aries, saying that since that's quote unquote the first sign of the zodiac, or could be for various reasons, that should be associated with the first house, and then since Taurus is the second sign, that Taurus should be associated with the second house, and so on and so forth. That's not I mean, is that an approach or a construct that you guys use at all?
Hard no.
Hard no.
Yeah, my ability to articulate, delineate, and understand houses improved vastly when I cured myself of that virus. Since I got off that course of antibiotics, I can see that there is some resonance with some signs and houses. It's not that there's zero relationship between the two 12s, but they are very different. And you will do yourself much more harm than good by conflating them. Like, keep them separate and then note where there's resonance, but don't conflate them. It'll ruin both the signs and the houses.
Right. So, and one of the things that's surprising, if you actually go back and look at the history of astrology, is that's actually a relatively recent idea. That if you go back just a few decades, it's only become super popular, and everybody's only started to take it for granted for the most part in just the past few decades. And if you go much further beyond that, it really becomes less and less of a thing until eventually, if you go back a few hundred years, it just disappears, and astrologers weren't even using that as a construct at all in order to develop the significations of the houses originally.
Yeah. So absolutely one additional note. So that actually shows up as like tertiary or even less important, just sort of note about houses in I believe the Brihat Parashara Horashastra, which is the very important Vedic astrology text, where they're like, oh yeah, there is this arrangement and that has this very limited meaning, and you might use that for these very specific purposes. It's like way off to the side is like, yeah, there's this for sometimes for this, but it's not primary with the houses there anyway, or it's not primary, and it doesn't provide the primary association of planets with houses, but it is off there somewhere on the side. It's been noted.
Right, and I mean it shows up also in the Western tradition. I think it first starts showing up in like the 17th century with like Lilly, or one of his contemporaries, like Culpeper or something like that, starts using it in a medical context.
Yeah. In
is that
terms
right?
of assigning maybe body parts to the houses, there does
Right.
seem to kind of be the Aries first house head. So like the head is Aries and the head is first house type of thing. But I agree with Austin in that your chart work becomes much more rich and nuanced and personalized if you really focus on, in this particular chart, Cancer is on the second house. So Cancer is the second house sign, or Cancer is describing part of the attitude to money or income or what have you.
Sure. So yeah, so we won't be using that. And that I did a whole episode on this like a long time ago. So you can go back and listen to that if you want to hear more about this in episode 17 of the Astrology Podcast, titled The Rationale for the Significations of the Houses. And you'll hear everything you've ever wanted to hear about that topic. So more
Which
than
is
you want to
worth
hear.
a listen.
It's
Or
a
didn't you write a paper on this too?
Well, I wrote a paper on the planetary joys that also
That's
had a
it.
similarly long
Yeah.
title that was titled like the planetary joys and the origins of the
The
significations of
significations
the houses.
Honestly,
and the
it's very
triplicities.
good. It's very good, that paper.
Yeah, so what I
recommend it.
showed there is they had just a whole other independent reason for developing the significations of the houses that had nothing to do with the signs of the zodiac. And it's just an important realization to have, because it's important for this reason, because you have to understand that the signs of the zodiac and the houses are two different reference systems astronomically, and they have their own like independent meaning that you need to understand in isolation on its own and on its own terms in order to develop the deepest understanding of what each of them is doing and why they mean what they mean. So that's a lot of what we're going to get into today if we ever eventually get to talking about the signs of the zodiac. So why don't we do that with the first sign that we've established as the first
Yay!
sign, which is Aries. So you guys were saying earlier, Austin, that sometimes you like to switch or jump around. And for me, like starting with Aries is always tough because I have a much more well-defined sense of like certain signs like Virgo or Leo, and Aries is one that's a little bit more difficult for me to have a quick and like easy like conceptualization. What is you guys' starting point for understanding Aries?
Okay, so I start with the fact that this is a cardinal fire sign,
Yeah.
right? So cardinal's beginning. How do you begin fire? You begin with friction. You need friction. That's how you need friction to get a spark and then to ignite things. And so, Aries happens to be Mars ruled. Obviously, this is a yang sign if we're talking about friction and ignition. To have friction, you need two things, right? Mars needs two things. You need resistance, right? You need friction to get that spark. And so Aries is about in essence, is about the friction which creates ignitions. And it's the initial charge. It's the moment of combustion. And then there's a burning bright, there's a radiance. Aries is ruled by Mars, which is a planet of not sustained and temperate fire, but intemperate fire. Fire which burns hot enough to melt metal, right? Which burns hot enough to topple nations. It's the fire of change, and it's about it's very much the pedal to the metal sign, which doesn't mean, and so part of what that means is you can't sustain it. It's inherently unsustainable because it's the initial explosion. And so in people, you get when people have Aries planets, they flare up and burn hot, and then they get really tired and need a nap and pretend that they're just that awesome the whole time. For events, it's events that happen really quickly, right? Like the Arab Spring happened when Uranus went into Aries, right? And it just went up, it was an ignition. It was not like the sustain was not so good on that, but the ignition, the initial fire was right there. And so I always think of that moment of friction, the relationship of two things, creating friction, that spark, and then the spark hits the fuel, and that's Aries.
Yeah, I always use a very similar metaphor, Austin and Chris, which is the idea of like Aries is the Aries version of fire is the match. It's the first thing that is going to light the whole fire. And whether that fire burns all night in your fireplace, like maybe a Leo fire, or whether it burns across the countryside, which is more like a Sag fire, the spark, the starting point. I love that word ignition. That is the Aries energy. And it's quick, it's acute, it comes into being, or it happens, it's fast, it's immediate, it's urgent. There's a spontaneity to it, but it doesn't have the follow through or the staying power. It's in an athletics competition, it's a sprint. This is the 100-meter sprint. Just get from A to B as fast as you can.
Yes, perfect.
That's it.
So I think I'm the only one here with planets in Aries.
Yes.
So I have Mercury.
Hello, Mercury.
Yeah, I have Mercury in Aries in the 10th. And so for me, like, I either feel like my mind is on fire, or I'm trying to get the dry wood, or not the dry wood. I'm trying to get the wet wood to actually take the fire. I'm like, come on.
Right.
Like trying to dry it out, get it moving. Yeah.
And sometimes that can psychologically lead to things like impatience, or impatience can sometimes be a quality associated with Aries because of the feeling of like wanting to get moving, wanting to get things going, and not wanting to take things slowly, or not wanting to hold back necessarily.
Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Aries acts and then thinks.
But just give it everything you got right from the start.
Well, and there's a spontaneous quality. It's like the striking while the iron is hot, or while I think of it in martial arts terms. It's like you have that half second to just explode and knock them out. And
if you hesitate for a moment, you miss that opportunity.
Yeah, exactly. Like that's gone. And so there's, and part of the impatience is also like, no, it's the time to do this. Yeah. And that's just a fire thing. Fire people, when we're talking about it psychologically, fire people will just tend to see, okay, now it's time to act.
Yeah.
And it's people are like, well, let's analyze that and explain that. It's like, no. I can just see it.
No, just do it.
Like there's not enough time to explain to you. And if you think about, fire is the most active element. If you think about being in a sporting competition, for example, like you don't have time to analyze things. The people who are best at action see it and do it.
Yeah, and I'm not even like it's that instinctive energy of, because in a sporting event, there isn't time to think or plan. Your reaction and your training comes into it. And there that I guess in tendency, if you like, to just do it. So there's a boldness and there's a courage here in Aries as well, where there's almost like the time to do it is now, and I'm not going to get stuck worrying about whether I'm good enough to do it or whether it's the right time to do it. We're just doing it. And so there's movement that comes out of Aries too. It wants to keep a sense of momentum and pacing.
But if we're talking about the pure Aries archetype, it always gets tired.
It does. It's the 100-meter sprint and it's done.
And it's the difference between speed and acceleration. We're not talking about sustaining a speed. We're talking about the amount of power that's generated from a sudden acceleration. That's what a strike is. If I hit something where my arm moves at exactly the same speed the whole time, that's a push. My punch will have no juice. But if I go from nothing, if I go from 0 to 60 as quick as possible, then there's an explosion, which changes things in a different way than a push. You can see this.
Yeah, great distinction.
Thank you. The ram is the symbol. Rams are literally named for doing quick explosive movements. They ram. You don't ram by pushing slowly. A ram will bunch up. You can watch them on the internet or wherever, or animal shows. They'll kind of bunch up and get ready, and they'll explode forward. And they don't run for a mile at that speed. It's an explosive headbutt, right? And where does Aries rule? It rules the head.
Yeah, I think that's good because like an Aries type condition or a strategy is fast. It's the implementation or the startup phase. It's not the follow through and the maintenance.
No, and a lot of this is. Go ahead, Austin.
I was just saying, yeah, it's inspired. I see a lot of Aries people, as well as my Aries planet, function on inspiration. Like, oh, I'm on fire in this moment. Like, let's do it, right?
Yeah,
and then like
immediate.
And then we'll see about tomorrow. But
and a lot of this is like the this side of Mars, the side of the Mars archetype, the Mars and Aries side of the Mars archetype, as opposed to the Mars and Scorpio side of the Mars archetype. This is the side that has this sort of berserker type energy, or this fury or frenzy, or sort of somewhat wild or somewhat like frantic sort of component that has, or like Austin, I think you used this analogy I don't know if you used this analogy, but like, and actually I don't know if this is a great analogy, but it was like a knife attack, because knives are always associated with Mars, or traditionally have been associated with Mars. And I think I thought it was you once, Austin, that talked about like what like a knife attack is actually like, that it's kind of like a frantic or a wild type energy or thing that's fast and quick and difficult to defend against in like a martial arts context, but people don't often realize that, like what that actually involves.
Yeah, I was probably one of the main things I was taught. The first rule of knife fighting, which I was taught, was the first rule of a knife fight is that you're going to get cut.
Right.
Like even if you win, you're going to get cut. And so plan on that. Right. There's definitely this like throwing yourself into the melee. So in boxing, they talk about staying in the pocket. The pocket is where you're both in range, where you can both hit each other with both hands without moving your feet. Right. So it's that trading. Right. So it's messy. It's not like staying on the outside and picking your shots. Aries is a very in the pocket sign, where you're moving, you're moving and hitting and getting hit and back and forth. And, some people feed off of that. Some people feed off of that friction, right? That friction just brings some people, it helps them combust and bring even more to the table. Whereas some people wilt in that space, both in life and in a ring. what was I going to say? So just, while we're using fighting metaphors, which is entirely appropriate for Aries, two of the most famous mixed martial arts fighters were both Mars and Aries, Ronda Rousey and Conor McGregor, who just got handled over the weekend. But both of those fighters, when they win, they win extremely quickly. They would just Ronda would just run over to the other side and break her opponent's arm. Conor would just run up and pop somebody.
So they can win when the fight gets done quickly, basically.
Yeah, and so the thing that everyone was saying about the recent Conor Khabib fight is they're like, well, either Conor knocks him out in the first 2 rounds or Khabib mauls him for 5 rounds. What's really interesting about that, I don't want to turn this into too much of a side topic, but so Conor's a Mars and Aries, and then his opponent Khabib was a Mars and Aries, but Mars and Aries retrograde. And it's interesting because he provides the slowest and most painful maulings. It's literally like the opposite of what you would expect from Mars and Aries. Conor, Mars direct, literally dashes across the cage, punches someone, hopefully they're done. Khabib, Mars and Aries retro, gets your leg, pulls you down, slowly, advances position, and just slowly beats on you for 25 minutes. It's literally people refer to it as a slow mauling, right? But with Mars and Aries direct, like Conor McGregor, Ronda Rousey, like these people who just run across the ring and pop somebody.
So there's kind of like a first into the breach type quality with Aries then, and that's, again, partially coming from that Mars thing.
I would also say there's a champion quality. And you can see that with the sun being exalted in Aries. It's everybody witness my power. Look at how, how Dragon Ball Z, how Super Saiyan I can go. Look at the heights that I can achieve for at least that moment. It's not sustainable, but it's what you can be for X amount of minutes.
Sure. And what I like about that, and especially with the first into the breach thing, is there's a side that can come out then, and part of that can manifest as a quality sometimes of courage or courageousness as one of the higher manifestations of that. Like the ability to not that you don't have fear, because there was something I was reading about courage recently, which is that it's not the absence of fear, but it's not being able to suppress it, or being able to still have that, but still overcome it and do what needs to be done and sort of dive in head first despite that.
Yeah, courage is not the absence of fear, but the ability to move forward even while being afraid.
Sure. And that's, to me, that's one of the higher expressions of Aries when done well. It can be that sort of energy of courageousness.
Yeah, I really like how you phrase that, Chris, the idea of the first into the breach, because I do see this a lot in clients that have significant planets in Aries, or, perhaps their midheaven in Aries or their 10th house or what have you, that there is this willingness to go first, or to go, into new territory, and that's part of the Mars energy of maybe the breaking new ground or pushing forward first. And there seems like a fearlessness, although I'm not sure that's what it is. It's just a drive or a passion or an instinct to test and to conquer and to take on the challenge of going somewhere new.
Yeah, there might be kind of
a
risk taker quality then as well that might be associated with that, which could be both positive and negative. Like in the negative expression, it could be maybe being overly throwing caution to the wind and being overly have impetuousness or something like that.
Right, which is why Saturn is fallen in Aries.
Yeah.
It's the exact opposite principle of Saturn's so let's think about it. Let's do
what are the consequences going to be? And Aries doesn't care about any of that.
Yeah, it's whatever. We'll just do it. We'll just do it harder.
Yeah. I know, and it's not as though that every sign corresponds to a certain age period, but I always think of a teenage male when I think, sort of the classic, there's a physicality. I remember watching my brothers growing up. They didn't know their own strength at that point. So there is, they would sort of take action or do things. It's oh, that was more than what I was expected, because there's this raw strength there, if you like.
Well, and I think
think first, act later.
That's a big part of the.
Yeah.
It's a big part of the interior component of planets in Aries is that they want to discover what they're capable of.
They do. They want to challenge and be tested.
Well, and they want to prove in action that they're capable of being something, which is, I believe, part of the exaltation of the sun in Aries. The sun in Leo just is like, yeah, I'm me. I don't need to prove that to anybody. Whereas Aries is like, I'm pretty sure I'm this, and I'm going to prove it to everybody.
Well, and it's by doing it, not like thinking it through necessarily ahead of time or abstractly.
Well, there might be that, but it always comes back to the proof is in the pudding, right? And that's very, that's Mars. Mars is like, well, that's great. What are you going to do?
Yeah.
Sure. All right. Let's see what else. What are there other major like core qualities that we need to cover? Not that we're moving on right away, but we will soon. But what are some other areas that we're forgetting or overlooking? Or are there any other manifestations or like major areas? So part of what we're doing at this point, and that's something I meant to mention, is Austin, you mentioned the essential dignities, where you're tying in sometimes the essential dignities, and that's one of the conceptual constructs that you use of not just what planet rules that sign, but you also pay attention to the exaltations, where there's certain signs where planets are said to be exalted in those signs. And there's also the concept of fall, or the concept of a planet's depression, which is the sign opposite its exaltation. And then finally, there's also the sign of its detriment or exile, which is the sign opposite to a planet's domicile or opposite to the sign that it rules. Since the signs of the zodiac that the planets rule, like Mars ruling Aries, were originally conceptualized as like the homes or the dwelling places of the planets, that Mars was said to have its home in Aries. And so the opposite of that is when Mars is in Libra, which is the sign of its detriment, or sometimes it's called its exile. So that's a conceptual construct that you'll be integrating and weaving into this.
Yeah, well, it's just something like a planet's relationship to a sign tells you something about the territory of that sign. Right? That the sun exalts in that Aries territory tells you something about Aries. It tells you something about the sun, and it tells you something about Aries. And so just talking about ramming things and ignition and lighter fluid and all that, we're like, okay, that doesn't sound safe. So maybe Saturn's not good there. And like, that doesn't sound super like chill. And so maybe Venus isn't, doesn't have the easiest time there. Right. Whereas the, Sun and Mars both like it there. It's these things flow very naturally once you understand what the quality of that is. Like, Venus can maybe figure out something to do with lighter fluid and swords, but it's not what Venus would choose first.
They would not be her normal tools, basically.
Right.
Yeah, and I think that the other thing that comes to my mind is that Aries is a very solo or independent sign, which is just an expression of the qualities we've been talking about. Aries likes to go alone. It likes to go fast. It likes to work independently of the supervision. Anytime I see like Aries connected to career, it's a very strong signature for someone wanting autonomy at work, that they want to be able to kind of choose for themselves. They're happy to work hard. They're happy to take on a challenge, for instance. They like something that's a little bit like, oh, I'm not sure. Are we going to be able to meet that? But they do want the freedom to do it according to their own preferences.
Yes. Aries 10th and midheaven over here agrees.
Yes. It's one of those ones you can honestly take to the bank. And then, of course, as we're talking about rulerships and things like that, Aries is the only sign, it's the only fire sign that Mars is associated with from the essential dignities perspective. And so there is something very combustible about the fiery planet Mars, the red planet, in a fire sign. The combination of that is quite extreme, and it's unique.
Definitely. And so all of this is great because all these keywords we're coming up with, what all of this is fundamentally is just circling back, is fundamentally just what happens when you have the overlap of those four primary qualities, where Aries is it's a masculine sign, it's a cardinal sign, it's a fire sign, and it's ruled by Mars, or Mars has its domicile there. And then it's all four of those overlapping things at once that then result in all of these different significations, or like archetypal scenarios that we're talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
just
so
reiterating something basic for the sake of it.
yeah, and so just in
It
interest of
is.
time, we should probably keep moving.
Yeah.
Sure. Well, that was exactly 20 minutes, so I started timing it because we were going to do 20 minutes per sign. That was the original plan, at least.
Right. Okay,
So I
cool. Yeah,
think
I was also timing.
okay, good. All right. So so let's move on. Any final
Yeah.
words on Aries, or are we good?
I'm good.
You're good? Okay.
Oh, I will just say Aries planets like to be badasses. Like the interiority of it, like if you got planet in Aries, that part of you wants to be a badass. Maybe it's a badass calligrapher, maybe it's a badass, you know, arborealist, maybe it's a badass whatever, but like Aries planets want to be badass. Like that's like yeah. Like that's the sort of ego ideal that Aries planets move towards.
Definitely. And so let's do like a good expression, bad expression thing, because that might be a good thing to come back to. Like good expression is like courage or being a badass and being like courageous or something, let's say. Negative expression is what? Like being obnoxious about that?
Yeah, being contentious, not recognizing your weaknesses, identifying only with your highest points, in the body, burning out the body, so that you've tapped your adrenal reserves and you're constantly running on E, overheating the body, through, you know, excessive activity and having in various inflammatory conditions, stuff like that.
Sure. Being like egocentrism, being
Yeah, being
egocentric.
selfish.
Yeah,
being selfish.
incredibly
okay.
selfish.
I a bunch of my friends growing up were Aries, and my Scorpio friend, you know, from when we were teenagers, when he found out about astrology, which he doesn't really like, but he was like, yeah, he's like, I think that the Aries motto is hurry up and get off your ass and be selfish.
Sure.
He was like, hurry up and be selfish. And, you know, he was a rather negative fellow. And certainly that's not true of everybody with Aries stuff, but that is the kind of shit Aries mantra is like, need to get up off my ass and be selfish.
Sure. Well, and it becomes more clear once we start contrasting that with some of the other signs that we'll get into, which are more have a tendency maybe to subvert maybe some of their own desires for let's say the greater good or for somebody else's good or something like that, versus for Aries the tendency is more typically aligned with self. I mean, is that going too far?
No, I mean
perfect.
Sun and Mars, right?
Yeah,
Mars
I know what I want, and I'm going to make sure that I get that.
Right.
That
and so if you have that in your 7th, then you'll probably have a partner like that. If you have that in the 4th, then your mom was probably like that. If you have that in the 10th, you're like that professionally. If you have that in the 11th, you have friends like that, you know, et cetera, et cetera.
Sure.
Yeah.
I love that. So some of the signs will manifest through the house that they fall in your chart. Sometimes they'll manifest through whatever planets you have placed there, whether that's you expressing that yourself or whether that's like partners or other people in your life represented by that planet that express it, and so on and so forth. Maybe I'm going too far afield here.
No.
Like
I mean, it's a key point because it's one of the core tenets that when beginners come into astrology, they have to kind of realize actually they have all of the 12 signs in their chart. And even if they don't have any planets in that sign, they will have a house area or a house cusp, which means the qualities of that sign are influencing their experiences and the people they encounter in that area of life. So it's really critical because even though you might identify, oh, I'm a Scorpio or my Venus is in Libra or whatever it is, you do have all 12 zodiac signs in your chart through their association with the houses.
It's funny that you mentioned that. The childhood friend that I was talking about who was very critical of Aries was a Scorpio with Venus in Libra.
Oh my goodness.
Venus on the rising, and he was very offended by the brash Aries ways.
Of course he would. Of course he would have been. Yeah.
I love that. And then, yeah, through that synastry, then different people are going to have different perceptions of different signs based on their own placements and whether those signs gel well with or do not gel well with certain signs. That actually is an issue, though, because then it's impossible for anybody to... I was thinking about this the other day, and I was trying to condense it into like a tweet, but I was unable to. It's impossible for anybody to fully articulate the quality of any sign because it's always going to be partially, influenced by their own placements and their own perception of that sign on some level. there's like a subjectivity to it.
On sun level, that's true, but it's also a gift when you start noticing, and this is actually something that horoscoping is good for. You start noticing your reactions to each of the signs, and then you see where that's coming from in you, and that actually teaches you more about not just you, but you're like, oh, so I have this Mars and blah blah blah, and that's reacting to this other thing. And so it's actually, I would say that it's a point of enrichment. There's a lot to mine there by understanding your reactions.
Sure. And one last thing, for character things, people listening to this for the first time that may only know about the signs of the zodiac and they may only know their sun sign. There's different reasons why you might really be have a strong affinity or feel strongly about some sign. Like some people really do identify with their sun sign, but other people maybe not as much, and that probably has a lot to do with whether it's just your sun in that placement, whether you have your ascendant in a different sign, whether your moon is in a different sign, whether I've noticed, the ruler of the ascendant, if it's in a specific sign of the zodiac, that can really mean that person strongly identifies with that sign in some instances, especially from a character standpoint. There's probably other factors like that should be mentioned in passing, just in terms of when a zodiac sign is going to play a dominant role in your life or your character for some reason.
Yep.
But that's probably all we need to say about that. So why don't we move on?
I think that was my turn for an awkward transition.
Yeah. You need a good catchphrase like I have. I started saying sure like 4 or 5 years ago, and I can't get over it. I need to come up with a better one.
Too funny.
Yeah, I'll start a poll on Twitter for that later. So in the meantime, let's transition to Taurus. So the second sign of the zodiac, traditionally, whatever, second sign usually that's dealt with. So Taurus is a quote unquote feminine sign. It is a fixed sign in terms of its modality. It is an earth sign, and it is ruled by, or it is associated with, the planet Venus. So those are our 4 primary properties. Where do we start for Taurus? Where do you start, Kelly?
Well, I usually talk about how distinctly different Taurus is from Aries. So right out of the gate, we've got this very sort of masculine or yang sign in Aries that's quite quick and impatient. And Taurus is the opposite in many ways. It's where we slow down. We want to take our time. So Taurus has a very methodical, measured approach. It doesn't like to change things. People with planets in Taurus, these will describe some of the most stubborn but also reliable or loyal features of that person or that chart. So there's an unchanging, like a resistance to change, because what Taurus tends to do is identify the comfort points in wherever they are, so they can get settled into where they are. But it is a sign that has incredibly feminine, I always think of the word fecund for the sign of Taurus. It's the sign of Venus, it's the exaltation of the moon. And I'm always thinking of my lovely garden images, because this is where we kind of want to grow things in that earthy, grounded kind of way. So there's a slow, steady building. And the difference, if you like, between the bull that is associated with Taurus versus the ram associated with Aries, that ram is like, it's literally butting its head against the gate. Whereas the steady bull, it's slow to get started, but once it goes, it will go all day. So the staying power and the endurance quality, if you like, of Taurus is quite strong.
Yeah, I would say
there's
that
like a plodding quality.
There is, like, they don't like to go too fast, and they can take a while to get started. But once they go, so they're really good in that maintenance, or this is the ongoing, we need to do this every week or every month. The Taurus will love that repetition.
I would say that Taurus is a very consistent sign.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And because, Taurus planets tend to be, they're just what they are. Like if you're waiting for your friend with a bunch of stuff in Taurus to figure their shit out and change, and go through a big change, keep waiting. If you're waiting for
get comfortable.
But you also don't have to worry. Like you kind of, like if you're relating to Taurus, people with heavy Taurus planets, their virtues are their virtues. Their vices are their vices. Like these things may change, but slowly. Like don't hold your breath.
Mm.
And so, consistency, is, oh, they're stubborn, right? That's the negative loaded term, right? But consistency is that they're just going to keep doing that. And that's part of the power of Taurus, is to fix the form of something. It's a fixed earth sign. Of the elements, earth is the only one that holds a shape, right? Water doesn't hold a shape. Air doesn't hold a shape. Fire doesn't hold a shape. Earth holds a shape. It holds form. And so it's good for, it's a great energy for creating things in the real world, things that have a shape and need to be able to endure in that shape. And so with Venus, it's associated with valuable things, works of art. You'll find a ton of Taurus in famous artist charts. Off the top of my head, I'm just thinking Kanye West is Venus in Taurus. And Salvador Dali had a bunch of stuff in Taurus. There's this like, I'm making a thing and I'm going to be painting for the next few days and I'm just going to keep painting. Don't bother me. Right. And
Right. I often think about that sometimes in terms of like something as simple as like food preferences, like fixed signs, especially liking to, once they've established what they like continually coming back to and like sticking with that thing rather than wanting to go try new things all the time, but instead being content or happy with almost most happy just sticking with that which is familiar or that which they know.
yeah. And with Taurus, as a particular fixed sign with that Venus rulership, I see a lot of people with Taurus heavy charts for whom the cultivation of taste is very important, whether it's in art or in dining. And that like once they've been exposed to a certain, how should we say, level of cuisine, they're like, won't eat anything beneath that. Or a certain level of art. I think of my uncle who's a Taurus, who's a classical music guy, and for a while he was like, rock and roll is not music. He's like, look at the complexities of Vivaldi and this and that. He's like, yeah, that's not music. And so there can be a certain snobbishness with people who are embodying the Taurus. But what I think about with Venus is it's about, Venus is about what's valuable to you, right? It's about, because taste is subjective, or it has an irremovable subjective component, whether it's taste in music, movies, food, et cetera, et cetera. There's like what has value, and then I would like to obtain and create what has value. I feel like those are deep drives for Venus ruled Taurus.
Totally. Yeah, that what has value. And I do find that Taurus is a sign that has some criteria for standards. It's not maybe like as luxury focused necessarily as, for instance, Leo can be, but Taurus is definitely about, I want the quality of something to be not just the basic. And once like they'll pay for natural this or more organic that, or this is, better quality. And as long as the better quality is commensurate with an improved experience, Taurus will be all over that.
Right. Then that's a good value.
Yes. Yeah.
Organic. I like that word organic because if there was any sign that I was going to associate with the word organic, I think Taurus would probably be it.
Right. And so let me jump over to just the sort of the event quality, right? If you're looking for the rhythm or pace of events, as signified by Taurus, it's slow and steady. It's what starts happening will keep happening. When we're looking at event qualities like Aries things happen all at once, right? Whereas Taurus things steadily unfold.
And it makes me think of like a degustation dinner, where you go out and there's going to be 6 or 7 courses and the food is paired with the wine and it's going to take 4 hours to eat your meal.
Yeah, 100%. And so it's associated with the neck, right?
That's something we completely forgot to mention.
I totally threw that in on Aries.
You did throw it in on Aries?
Yeah.
Okay. So just very briefly, just conceptually, the idea that there's assignments of the parts of the body, and Aries starts with the head, and then you, as the first sign of the zodiac, and then you work your way down the body through each of the successive signs. So Taurus is the neck, and Gemini becomes the shoulders and the arms, and so on and so forth.
Yep. And so the neck, think of the bull's neck, right? It's support. The neck is there to support the head, right? We have the yin power of supporting, right? With the Taurus ruled body part. That's also where all your food goes, because it first goes down your neck. I know people don't say it like that, but it's
That's true. Yeah.
And you also have the Venusian association of singing, Venus in the arts and singing, and it's the neck that produces the singing.
The sound. Yeah. I mean, Taurus is very tactile too. It's a sign associated with the senses or the sensory pleasures. So there's often that need to touch can be important with Taurus planets.
Yeah, that tactile quality of Taurus goes across a lot of different areas.
Totally.
But yeah, there's this. I would just say that there's with Taurus, just because it's really easy with Taurus to fall into like food metaphors, and that's not wrong, but there's just the other parts too. One thing I would say about planets in Taurus is they provide an understanding of the sequencing of how things actually happen. Like you got to wake up and do this in the morning, and you do this in the middle of the day, and then you do this at night. There's this ability to do concrete sequencing and then work with that. And sequencing involves pacing, involves alternating rest and activity. There's just like this sort of, kind of Tao of life thing that Taurus points towards. You spend time with what is most valuable, whether it's friends, career, et cetera, et cetera. There's just this, this consistent moving through life and this gentle alternation or, sustainable, non-herky-jerky alternation of activity and rest.
I like that. I'm just
That's
pulling up
beautiful.
I just remembered I meant to look through some charts to throw out a few charts every once in a while. And there's one of my Taurus rising charts or persons that has Taurus, ascendant in Taurus is George R.R. Martin. I don't know.
Game of Thrones.
Yes.
Yeah.
Sumptuous descriptions of food are about half the length of his books.
Yeah. And I mean, this is a series that is not coming out in a hurry. I mean,
he's taking his time.
Yeah, it takes him about 4 or 5 years to write one book. And these books are not quick, short reads. They're absolute tomes, 1,000-page type things.
Right. But he's also like, don't rush me. Like he's like, it'll be done when it's done.
Well, and this is a very Taurus quality that if you try to hurry them up, they dig their heels in and they go slower. It's like the worst thing you can do for Taurus placements or the Taurus part of your chart. You cannot make it happen faster.
Definitely. Let's see. Other one I thought that was interesting. George Lucas is one of my favorite like Taurus rising examples that I use because he also has Venus in Taurus, like in the first whole sign house, roughly conjunct the ascendant, as well as the sun and Mercury there. So he's got almost like quasi stellium in Taurus. But that's interesting to me just because he went to, ended up going to film school, and he was always very focused on the aesthetics of film and like the artistic nature of things. And like some of that, kind of comes through in some aspects of the Star Wars trilogy. To some extent in terms of this aesthetics.
Yeah, I mean, the Venusian. I mean, it's the substance. Like, so we're talking about like the Earth of Venus, right? It's like, what does that color make you feel like? What does that sound make you feel like? Those are all real things. Colors, sounds. What is this texture like, right? So it feeds into Venus's artistic agenda very clearly.
So the senses, there's something very important about like the sense quality of Taurus, almost maybe more than any other sign.
I think that's true.
100%. 100%. It's the only earth sign of Venus. So we're getting the beauty or the indulgence or the pleasure through the physical, through the tangible realms, which is evoking all the senses.
Right. So it's like taste, but also like color, touch.
Sight, touch, sound, smell, all of those experiences.
Brilliant. I love that.
Yeah.
Okay, that's really good. Where are we at on time? Are you timing this one, Austin?
Yeah, we're at 19 and a half minutes.
Really? For
Taurus.
Taurus already?
Yeah.
Wow.
The slow
okay.
sign goes fast.
Right. All right. Let's see. Let's do a quick like
Good,
positive
bad.
manifestation, bad, negative manifestation. I mean, we've said a lot of positive ones so far.
Kate,
What's some?
Kelly, why don't you say nice things and I'll say mean things?
Oh yeah, you guys can be like the
We can stay to our type. Well,
good angel, bad angel.
Good angel, but yeah. Good things about Taurus, they are very steady and loyal and reliable. So they are consistent. It's a wonderful quality. They will help you, or, Taurus qualities or planets, they help you slow down to smell the roses, like that cliche of enjoy the moment, be in the present, be here now, be where you are. These are very Taurus qualities, and quality that is genuine is worth paying for. So these are Taurus traits, I guess, that are maybe a bit more positive. Over to you, Dark Angel.
Okay, let's see. So negative Taurus things. Greedy, shady, stubborn, selfish, boring.
Boring's a good one.
And so yeah, and problems in Taurus will manifest in your throat generally. If you're getting a nasty transit from something in Taurus that's linked to health in your chart, a lot of times it'll show up as you lose your voice or it's a sore throat. Let's see. Yeah. It's greedy, shady, stubborn, boring works for me for negatives.
Perfect.
Oh,
Brilliant.
snobbish.
Snobbish.
See, that's really interesting to me because I don't think of Taurus, like you're mentioning the refined quality of Taurus, and I can see that on some level, but I don't usually think of Taurus as, like, I often will associate some of that more with like Libra in terms of the potential for that, for being more drawn to the higher, having much more of a focus or an obsession with aesthetics and refinement, to the point of maybe occasionally snobbishness being an issue, whereas you see that as a real potential issue with Taurus.
Oh, consistently.
Okay. I'm trying to think, is there any other major points that we need to mention with Taurus before we move on?
I think we've got the gist.
Okay. All right, cool. Well, let's move on then to the third sign, which is Gemini. Gemini is a masculine, so we're alternating back to a masculine polarity. It is a mutable sign. It's our first mutable sign in terms of its modality or its quadruplicity. It is an air sign, and it is a sign. It's one of the two signs that's ruled by the planet Mercury. All right. So where do we want to start?
Well, I just want to start with the massive repolarization from Taurus to Gemini.
Yeah.
So we're literally going from fixed Earth to mutable air. We're going from like from a stone to a cyclone, right? In terms of like static versus dynamic, right? Not only is air a much more dynamic element than Earth, but this is mutable air. So this is as unstable as the air gets, right? Mutable signs have a lot of good qualities. Stability is not one of them. And it's ruled by Mercury, right? Which is the quickest moving planet other than the moon, right? Mercury, Mercury's hiding behind the sun. It's in front of the sun. It's, you can see it for a little bit in the morning. You can see it for a little bit at night, and then it's changed. It's fast. It's slow. This is very volatile. This is very volatile territory. This is, Gemini is very ADD, especially when compared to Taurus.
Well, and you make a good point, Austin, because when we change from one sign to the next, we don't always have quite the dramatic shift in quality. And the Taurus Gemini one, Taurus being earth has that cold, dry combination, and Gemini being air has the heat and moisture combination. So everything switches, and it does feel very distinctly different. It's like the rock in the garden versus the butterfly, moving around. And there's a nimbleness and an agileness to Gemini. It is the air sign of Mercury, the planet of the mind. So we have a lot of mental energy coming in this sign, a lot of thinking. There is a tendency to be quite scattered because it is a mutable sign, and they do tend to have a diffusive kind of quality. And the scattering of the mutable in Gemini tends to be a mental thing. So the mind is going in 10 different directions at once, if you like. So the busy mind.
Yeah. And so I would add to scattering, splitting. Like Gemini splits in two, so it has somebody to talk to. Like, oh, what do you, so we can have a debate, so we can have a conversation, so we can have some back and forth.
Yeah.
And, in the body, so, Aries head, Taurus neck, and then the body splits at the shoulders and arms. And that's Gemini. Gemini rules the first split as we're going down. And so Gemini rules, Mercury rules hands, right? Little clever, dexterous. And what's at the end of the hand? Body splits again into 5 on each side. So we have splitting to cover ground, splitting to do more clever, technical, intricate things. Splitting.
That's really important since this is the first, like the first 2 signs that we talked about, there was a singular quality, and this is the first sign of any of them that we're talking about that does have that. It has a dual quality, and of course, Gemini is the image associated with it is the twins, and that's what Gemini means, is the twins. And I should mention that's what the original Greek, I wanted to mention what the original Greek terms were for each of these. So Aries, in Latin, Aries is the term that means the ram. Taurus literally means the bull in Latin. Gemini means the twins, and so on and so forth.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
So that duality is a really important keyword then that comes up really frequently for Gemini and different types of duality.
Yeah, the polarity. And I think that leads to some of what might be the sort of negative or more tricky traits of Gemini, which is their inconsistency. And maybe if Taurus is too slow to change or doesn't change enough, Gemini is a sign that would change too frequently or too much. From morning to night, it might have found out something new or changed its perspective. There is the flittering. And I always think, of course, me and my garden, but the thing in the garden that makes me think of Gemini is the pollinator. Because in Gemini, we do, as you said, Austin, we want to have that conversation. We want to talk, but we need someone else to be giving input. So the idea of pollination, where we're taking something from one, passing it on to the other, picking up something else and going elsewhere again.
Yeah, right. And as a mode, like doing as many things as possible at the same time. Right. Yeah. Which is a way of doing them fast, right? Like while I'm pollinating this, I'm getting this, and while I'm doing this, I'm doing this. And, there's that multiplying, splitting quality, right? Where you're like, I have a moon in Gemini, which rules my rising. Right. And so that like I can feel that like wanting to do everything at once, which I've worked on taming my entire life. But like and you can't, the thing is with Gemini, it's like, you'll see everything you could do all at the same time. And maybe even, and there's a Gemini paralysis that comes from seeing too many possibilities all at the same time. But my mom gave me the wisdom, the antidote wisdom to that when I was young. She said, you can do anything you want. Or no, she said, you can do everything you want. You just can't do it all at the same time.
Yeah. And that's one of the greatest struggles for Gemini, is to make a choice and to narrow their options. And I don't know that Geminis ever get, or Gemini energy, the pure form, it never kind of wants one thing. It definitely needs a multiplicity, but to bring it down from 7 options to 3 or 4 can sometimes create better odds for getting things done.
Yeah. Well, 7 to 3 is exactly right. So, if people have like their midheavens in Gemini and maybe they got a planet there, they're probably going to have multiple careers, and they may have like multiple things that they're doing at the same time. Be like, I'm a DJ and a poet, and I also do construction, right? But that they can make that work, but they can't make 7 things work.
No.
Right. It's cutting it down to only 2 or 3. Right. But I've seen people struggle with that. And the answer is multiple. It's just that it's not quite that multiple.
That's the key, is that, you almost want to redefine what multiple is. And, it's not 15, but you can probably, somewhere around the 3 or 4. And that can be liberation for midheavens in Gemini, for instance.
in the Hellenistic text, they would often delineate mutable signs, but especially Gemini, as indicating two of whatever is signified. So if it's like associated with the fifth house, they would say there will be at least two children, or sometimes with like the seventh house, maybe end up having more than one marriage in the life or something like that, if there's other factors that support that.
Yeah, or the person like does, likes being single and having a different date, with or a date with different people multiple times a week, like that multiple energy. Or if it's in the seventh, they want somebody who's got a bunch of different sides to them, who's interesting, keeps them guessing.
Sure.
Yeah.
And one of the things you guys were talking about, mentioning Mercury zipping around, is from an astronomical standpoint, its stations of all the planets that have retrogrades, which all of them except for the Sun and Moon do. Mercury stations retrograde and direct the most frequently, and that's why we have the Mercury retrograde periods, of course, 3 times a year, and why everybody's nowadays like talking about Mercury retrograde. It seems like constantly because it's happening every few months. That sort of feeds in from an astronomical perspective. That frequency is one of the reasons why then symbolically the notion of frequency and things happening more frequency becomes a major Gemini trait because of that association with Mercury.
Yep. Changing direction, changing visibility, changing speed, does all of those things more often than any other planet.
Yeah.
Sure. It just seems it's a really simple point, but it's a really important one, because sometimes it's like when I first started learning astrology, or when you learn astrology, usually you're just learning or memorizing just traits that are associated with, and you assume have always been associated with certain signs or certain planets or what have you. But a lot of these, actually, you can trace them back to very specific astronomical things of, what makes this planet different than this planet, and what does that mean, or how do we interpret that symbolically? If Mercury stations retrograde or direct more than the other planets, what would that correlate with?
Yeah, I mean, and Mercury does get into these little nooks and crannies in the ecliptic that other planets don't tend to get near. So there is this idea of the access all areas kind of pass that Mercury has that feeds into Mercury's signs, where they're able to discover or uncover information or ideas that the rest of us maybe just doesn't occur to planets in other signs. And that's, again, coming from that astronomical piece around what is Mercury actually doing in the sky.
Sure. So there's a huge like communicative quality to Gemini. I think everybody agrees, and that the positive manifestation of that is much more freer flow of information. But the negative side of that sometimes can be associating with that with a certain amount of like being sort of flighty, I think is one of the negative character traits that's sometimes associated with that.
I would
Is
say
that
self-contradictory.
self-contradictory?
Yeah, which if you're mad at somebody, you'd say that they're a hypocrite if they or that they're two-faced if they contradict themselves. But it's mutable air. It's changing ideas. Ooh, new facts just came in. Now I think this about this. Ooh, I had an interesting conversation with, I don't know, Jim about this topic, and now my viewpoint has changed.
Right.
It's being open to and wanting to change minds and have your mind changed. But there's, Gemini accumulates contradictions. And so that can also, there's a lot of, speaking as a Gemini moon, like a Gemini moon is the ruler of the Lord of the Ascendant. Like there's a lot of like taking in lots of contradictions and then having to sit with all of it and trying to figure out how it all makes sense. That's just, and that's part of the problem with Gemini is like, it's the opposite. Like Kelly said, it's the problem, which is exactly the opposite of the Taurus difficulty. Taurus isn't stretching far enough and taking in enough contradiction, whereas, Gemini is just taking in all of the contradictory things and pieces of information. If anything, this is kind of a Gemini age in the sense of being in constant information overload. Because
Right.
that's the short circuit for Gemini. It's stimulating. Gemini's stimulating. It's stimulating active, but it can fragment.
And since this is our first mutable sign, I mean, that's some of those is basically what mutable means, is some of those synonyms like changeable, variable, fluctuating, shifting, inconsistent, sometimes unpredictable, inconstant, fickle, uneven, unstable. Yeah, some of those other terms in terms of just defining what mutable means. This being our very first mutable sign, a lot of those become relevant in different ways.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
the mutability in Gemini, of course, is applied to the element of air. So the topics of the mind or ideas or conversation. And that's where you really see that variety or that inconsistency with the sign of Gemini.
Right. It's more of like an
Yeah,
intellectual inconsistency, or like Austin was saying, being able to change one's opinions after like a single conversation.
Yeah, and I guess I don't want to
well,
sound too negative on Gemini because their ability to adapt
Yeah.
and change as new input comes in. They are going to be early adopters when it comes to like new technology and things like that.
Yeah, like flexibility,
well,
like the ability to be flexible and to adapt.
And yes,
well,
Austin.
and I would also say to generate techniques, Mercury likes technique.
Yeah.
Mercury's like, Mercury and Gemini, it's getting super curious about, okay, well, why does it work that way? And taking things apart and be like, I'm going to put it back together differently, whether it's an idea or a sentence, or whatever kind of technique. Mercury and Gemini especially likes to play with technique and to use tricks on people, which are techniques that they don't know. A technique that you don't know is a trick that works.
That's a beautiful way of putting it. I like that.
Well, it'll work as long as you don't understand it. And Gemini doesn't want to be tricked. Gemini wants to trick you, right? Yeah. Gemini's like, ooh, how did you do that? What was that? What is that rhetorical device? How did that punch work? How did you set that up with a feint? It's very, and there are aesthetic strategies, there are martial strategies. Gemini is it's mercurial in a way that embraces some of the martial and Venusian. For a lot of the traditional images for the Gemini decans, you see a figure who has both implements of art and war. Or like one of the images is like, oh, it's this warrior in golden armor and he's an archer and he's got a sword and he's hanging out in the garden and singing songs and telling jokes. And, Gemini kind of goes both directions. It can be aesthetic, it can be combative, but it's exploratory, curious, technical, and tricksy.
The notion of technical, one of the things that comes through really strongly with the Mercury thing, and it comes through more strongly in Virgo, but it also comes up in Gemini, is focusing on that which is very small, and that being opposite to Sagittarius, which is ruled by Jupiter, which is focusing on like more that which is big or big picture things. And so Gemini and focusing on that which is small, which can sometimes mean focusing on the details, which becomes especially more prominent in Virgo, but to some extent is still true also in Mercury in Gemini.
Yeah, and we can come back to this with Virgo, but so Gemini is the active, young, masculine sign that Mercury rules, whereas Virgo is the yin earth. And so in Gemini, it's active. It's like, ooh, what can I do with those details? I noticed all this stuff I got really curious about. Now, what can I do with that? What can I pull off? Right. Whereas Virgo is a little bit more of how can I understand and assimilate? How can I get an almost scholarly understanding of how this works? Whereas Gemini is like, that's really interesting. I think I know what to do with that.
Right.
Yeah, that's
very quickly and like immediately applying it, even if not having like a full understanding of it yet, but there's an almost impulsive quality to it.
Yeah, because of the young energy.
Sorry, and it's almost like, oh, it's okay. So Virgo's like study or learn to do it the right way, and Gemini is like hack everything all the time.
Sure. One other thing that comes out is there's like a youthful quality to Gemini, and this sort of comes through the Mercury-ness as well. Like if we were to try to apply like age things, like there's certain signs that we might associate with like that which is older or something like that. But it seems like sometimes there's like a youthfulness that sometimes we end up associating with Gemini in different respects. Is that true? Have you guys seen that?
Yes.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, definitely. There is a youthful, young, fresh, inquisitive quality to Gemini for sure.
It's the the curious and plastic quality of youth.
Yes, with the
So
plasticity. That's beautiful.
thank you. In one system that associates planets with different ages, there's Mercury rules from ages 3 to 12. 3, which is because that's when the kids start asking why, and then it basically ends at puberty when a person has to, is pushed to pick a side by society and often their body. But it's that like non-sexual, both ends, neither gendered place where you're just like a little curious creature running around and learning everything and mimicking.
Right, definitely. And there's actually like a word for that that's really good. It's precocious. And I'm just pulling up the definition really quickly. And Google says of a child having developed certain abilities or proclivities at an earlier age than usual. And it gives some synonyms like gifted, talented, clever, intelligent, quick, which are interesting, sort of like mercurial keywords, but they're being applied to in a age context in somebody that's younger, and the ability to have that sort of like cleverness or intelligentness or quickness at an early or younger age than you would think that they should have.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. So we've how far, we're probably about 20 minutes on this one, right?
Yes, we just got the
I believe so.
the bell.
Okay. I think we've done a pretty good job already of doing like good qualities, bad qualities, right? Do we need to recapitulate that, or is there anything you guys want to say?
I think we already did that with the
I think we touched on pros and cons.
Did we balance things out enough? I know we were verging a little bit too negative for a second there, so I hope we didn't. I don't want to like bias like any one of these signs and like end up coming off like we're bashing like one sign and we're like
that's true.
I don't know that we did. I just want to make sure we balanced it out quickly enough. So the positive is really just that quick communicative ability being...
Geminis can talk to anyone about anything. Great to have in a social situation or with ice breaking. Their curiosity, they can just get something started in almost any situation.
Definitely. So they're definitely the conversation starter. Gemini is the one that you would want to have at a party to start a conversation and would thrive in that environment. So this is one of the first ones that's really like a social type sign in some sense.
Yes.
Yeah, well, air of the elements, air covers the most ground.
Yeah.
You mean physically covers?
Fires might... Yeah. Just starting from the physical elements, like earth is just there. You can move water, but it takes some doing. Fire can spread, but air, the air is blowing over us now and it'll be hundreds of miles away later. Air just covers ground.
Yeah, so that's a real like intellectual or communicative. It becomes part of our like keywords or our core meanings for air, it seems like.
Yep.
Yeah.
And so part of the air can scatter. No other element scatters like air. Air scatters the leaves, not fire, not water, not earth, air.
And this will come up more when we get there, but I think that becomes one of the primary meanings or reasons why Aquarius traditionally, where you can rationalize a lot of what modern astrologers associate with, like Uranus being associated with that sign, probably can more, from a traditional standpoint, be explained by that air association.
Yeah, yes. I think that there's a relatively profound correspondence between Uranus and air.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll cross that.
Yeah, we'll come to that.
Okay. Getting ahead of ourselves. All right. So that is sign number 3.
We've got to talk about water sign.
Yeah, we're finally getting to, I was feeling a little, we're talking about all these other elements. We're finally getting to the water signs. So you and I, especially Kelly, can breathe a sigh of relief. Austin,
yes.
you have some...
He's got a good amount of water too.
Yeah.
I've got South Node, Sun, Mars, Uranus, Jupiter, and rising in water.
Right. I guess I've got a little bit of stellium arrogance going on in terms of it. If you don't have a stellium of at least 4 or 5 planets in a specific sign, then
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I believe I'm the only one here who has a planet in all 3 water signs. So
I think that's true.
Okay,
Yeah,
that's
no,
a good
you take
point.
that cake. Yeah, because actually, Chris, I think you only have planets in one water sign.
I mean, when you say it like that, you don't have to say it like that. All right. Well, I went from being very like full of myself about that to suddenly feeling cut down to
Shit,
size.
it's like the throwdown about water signs. Austin is winning because I only have 2. And look, Chris, I really won. My planet in Scorpio is just Uranus. That's it. I mean, I'm not sure that I can claim that. It's not like it's a personal planet there.
Right. But you have like 20 planets in Pisces.
I do have a few planets.
you definitely win the Pisces throne, Kelly.
Well, and Scorpio, Chris is on the Scorpio throne, or he's in the Scorpio dungeon, maybe. I'm not sure.
I've got a nice shirt on. I just got printed up recently.
It's a
my
beautiful.
Scorpio shirt.
I'm really in love with that blue. Are the Pisces ones the same, or are they different?
Yeah, they're going to be the same. I'm just got the first. This is the first test shirt, so they're going to have them available wherever the store is, like astrologypodcast.com/store, and then you can find links to them.
Excellent.
So,
so
but yeah,
on the note of water sign, the Cancer one will be just the same too.
Right. So that would be a good card game because it's kind of like a card game what we were just doing of like, you have certain suits of it in like poker, for example, that beat other ones, and like what
Yeah.
who has what like a royal flush or something would be a stellium versus having like what Austin has with like covering all 3 water signs. That would be whatever the
3
other
of a kind or something.
That would probably be a straight,
A straight, okay.
right? Because straights are sequential.
Yes. And then you'd have to have like trump cards, like, sure, maybe you've got the sun in Pisces, but my Jupiter in Pisces is going to beat that, or something along those lines.
Yeah,
Right.
There you go.
Oh my God, I would love that. Somebody follow through with that and come up with a card game based on that, and make sure you give us
promote it on the show.
Where you can only play once with people, and then you find out who wins.
right.
Thanks for the Mars manifestation there, Austin.
I didn't describe the structure of the card game. I didn't make it up. I'm just saying if that's the way it works, then you play once and your chart either wins or loses.
Right, that's
Find
a good
out
point.
who the winners and losers are. Oh my goodness!
All right, well, give us credit at least if somebody does come up with that and win $1 million or makes $1 million. So let's move on to our next sign. Sign number 4, Cancer. Cancer is we are alternating again, so this is an odd sign, alternating odd and even. So this is a feminine sign, number 4. This is a cardinal sign, so we're coming back to cardinal. And this is a water sign, and it is ruled by the moon. So the moon has its domicile or its dwelling place in Cancer traditionally.
Yes.
All right. So
it does.
And
Well,
so
I think go. Okay, Austin, go.
Well, I just wanted to start with it's cardinal water. Where does the water come from? Right. So we're talking about the water and beginnings. Right. And so we have Cancer as, the sign of the moon, the sign of the mother. Right. We're talking, where does life come from? Oh, it comes from the primordial waters. What's going on inside the womb? Oh, it's filled with primordial waters that have a very similar salinity to seawater. Where does the water come from? It comes from the ground. It's a well. It's a spring. Where did civilization happen? Oh, people gathered around the source of the waters. People say, oh, Cancer is nurturing, right? It's what is nurturing? It's it's those first waters, whether it's mother's milk or the primordial sea or the spring or the well that keeps your town from, being dehydrated and dying, right? Like that's where you start. And what do you do with the source of the primordial waters, which nurtures you? You protect it. You build a goddamn shell around it. You don't let everybody fuck with the well. You don't you protect.
You keep it pure and safe.
Yeah, you protect a woman who's pregnant because she's in a more vulnerable position, et cetera, et cetera. So there's my first 10 cents. I got another quarter for you, but there's the first 10.
That's good. So a lot of those things with Cancer, it seems like the modern astrologers sometimes default to like associating with the 4th house, but it seems like a lot of those things we might draw, a lot of that comes from like the moon, especially in its association. And the moon, often one of the associations it had was like mothers and nurses, and like this nurturing component seems to be like a riff off or connected with a lot of the things that you're talking about, the idea of like nurturing something.
Yeah, and I think in both instances, it's about nurturing or protecting that which is most vulnerable. And it's, if you're a community, the water source that is, you lose that, you're going to die. We lose our young, if we lose our feeding, mothers or pregnant mothers type of thing, everything will die off because the protective quality in Cancer is highly developed. But it's very much directed towards protecting the vulnerable or those that, can't defend themselves, if you like.
Yeah, I think nurturing and also cultivation is, I think, very Cancerian. Like you garden, Kelly, you got to when something is, when you're like before the plant can stand on its own, like you got to be careful when you first transplant it from the pot. Got to make sure it has, you worry if there are too many cloudy days, you make sure it has the right water, et cetera, et cetera.
Sometimes you have to stake it to help it until it gets stronger.
Yeah, exactly. You prop it up for then, but like just if like the process of caring about something growing, right? That's, you instantly start like kind of, like you're putting it inside the circle to protect it, whether that's a physical fence or an emotional fence. It's just there. And, with Cancer, that can be, with people who have heavy Cancer, sometimes, it's like, oh, I really care about astrology. Like I want to nurture my skill and nurture the community. This is something I'm protective and emotional about. It's that caring energy, that can be applied to anything. But when you care, you protect and you nurture, right? And Jupiter's exalted there because it's about growing things. You protect them so they grow.
I like that your physical mannerism as you're trying to describe this is like putting your arms around as like hugging and protecting something like physically with your arms.
Right.
And what you do with your cat.
And that's the crab claw. That's the loving crab claw right there.
Yeah.
Right. So Cancer is the crab, and that's Karkanos was the Greek word, and that's like Cancer in Latin literally means the crab. Important point, actually. Cancer, I often laugh when Cancer is like accidentally artistically depicted as like a lobster. People just like it always makes me laugh just because it was originally in Greek. The term was crab, and the crab in terms of the symbolism actually becomes really important symbolically for understanding some of the meanings archetypally.
Well, one of the things I always take from the symbol of the crab for the sign of Cancer is that if you've watched a crab on the beach, they move sideways, and they move for a crab to get from A to B, they move in a zigzag style pattern. They don't go, this is not Aries. We're not just, heading straight out of the gate. And there's something really, there's a cautious quality to Cancer that sometimes manifests as a hesitation or is interpreted as a hesitation. It's not a fear, but it's a desire to protect what they have as they move forward, and they're happy to take what looks like a circuitous type of pathway if that is going to allow for the protection and the nurturing as part of the process. We don't want to give that up for anything, basically.
Yeah, it's absolutely. And it's spiraling in towards something rather than heading in a straight line or spiraling out from something. I know, I've got Cancer rising. And so like when I'm like, I'm going to do that, and I like spiral in on it. And then I spiral out from relaxation. I don't take straight lines that often.
Right.
No, straight lines don't exist for Cancer.
Which is one of the reasons why Mars has a hard time there.
Yeah.
So there's an indirect quality to it.
There is. And to go back to the Jupiter exaltation here, I do think there is a generosity in the sign of Cancer, but it's the emotional generosity rather necessarily than material generosity.
I think it's an emotional that moves the material.
The place it comes from is the emotion.
Absolutely. And then we got to flip this too, because so Cancer planets and Cancer people also want to be taken care of.
Correct.
They want to be inside the huggy circle, right? They want to they're nurturing, but they also want to be nurtured.
Yes.
And so Cancer as cardinal water can be very demanding emotionally. Like, I need this.
Yes.
Just as much as Cancer, Cancer archetypally can also be really good at saying, I know exactly what you need, and you don't even have to ask.
Yes. Yes. And there is, to do a bit of the pros and cons, I always think about Cancer because it's cardinal, has the reactive responsive tone to it. So it can be quite responsive because it's cardinal water. So this is like, if something happens, we've got to adapt to circumstances or change our plan, if you like. It's not the Scorpio version of water where we're like, oh my God, something's happened. We're just going to keep doing what we were doing. But there is a reactiveness, which sometimes manifests as a sensitivity or a moodiness that we see in the sign of Cancer. That it, if it doesn't get what it needs or it doesn't get that level of protection or care, there can be, the emotional response to that too.
Yeah. Well, and Cancer planets are really tuned to comfort. They're like, I'm not comfortable here.
Yeah. Or I don't feel safe here.
Yeah. Well, and that goes into, if you don't feel safe, you can't feel comfortable.
Yeah.
I would say.
They're just, yeah.
But I'm like that. I'm like, I don't know. I think I need a little bit of this to be in the right state to do this. And maybe I'll drink some water. And, there's just there's a cultivating one's state in one's like perfect bubble shell. And, as a cardinal sign, Cancer sets out to like, this is how it's going to be. I'm going to create this little world. I'm going to create a world that feels like this and then armor it so nobody can interfere with it.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting because the other sign that's associated, of course, with that comfort is Taurus. And the connection between Taurus and Cancer is the moon, that the moon rules Cancer and the moon is exalted in Taurus. And that the combination of Taurus Cancer is I always think of mud straight away, which is nourishing. And, you get this really lovely growth and richness from those two coming together. But all of that moisture comes from the sign of Cancer.
Those are definitely the two like nurturing signs of all of the signs of the zodiac. I mean, the only one that's maybe closer in any way might be Pisces, but that's in a much different way of more like charity or something.
Yeah, Pisces might forget to feed you, but Taurus or Cancer won't.
But Pisces cares about your soul.
That's the thing.
Right.
The orientation is different.
Yeah, it just
Or like Virgo is very helpful. Like
very
it's
helpful, but in a practical, tangible kind of way because it's Earth.
Right. Like let me fix your car or something
Yeah,
like that.
Yeah.
Whereas-
Let me help you solve this problem.
You'll feel better once we do this to-do list.
Correct.
You'll feel different once you get your chores done.
Yeah.
Right. Whereas
Work
Cancer
first.
and Taurus are more like sort of like welcome you into their home and give you food or something first thing that they think of.
Yeah, the Cancer, I think the comfort piece that Austin said was beautiful. The Cancer will want to make you feel comfortable at home. If you ever have to stay in someone's home and they've got Cancer planets, they will have just thought of all these little things that almost make you feel like you're with that archetypal mother energy, that somebody has just really taken the time to consider your comfort and gone out of their way to meet that.
Yep. And so
Brilliant.
the problem with
There are some problems with Cancer.
With comfort is like what's comfortable changes as quickly as the moon moves. I don't feel like doing this now. I don't know. I was like writing. It felt really good earlier, but now I don't feel like doing this now. And then in an hour, you're going to feel like doing something else. And so comfort is always relative to that very quick subjective tide. Planets in Cancer are subject to the rapid waxing and waning of the moon. And so, on a sort of crude but true level, Cancers are moody as fuck.
Right.
Yeah.
Moodiness.
Moodiness is absolutely, and it's an accurate description of the downside of Cancer. And the moon is moving so quickly, the Cancer's mood is just changing equally as quickly.
Right.
Yeah,
I want to reiterate that just to emphasize it because it's a great, additionally, this is again being tied into some very specific, concrete, tangible, astronomical thing, which is as we were talking about Mercury and Gemini and how Mercury of all of the planets like changes course, directions the most frequently. Cancer ruled by the moon is the planet which is constantly changing phases, and each month it's going from a new moon and it starts increasing in light and building up and getting brighter and brighter. Then it hits a full moon 2 weeks in, it reaches peak brightness, and then it starts getting dark and dark and dark until 2 weeks later it's at its darkest and has a new moon again. So it's constantly waxing and waning and changing in its level of brightness, so that there's this astronomical shift or frequency of its shifts, which then manifests symbolically in some of these things we're talking about with Cancer.
Yep, it changes position and phase quicker than anything else.
Yeah.
So
Doesn't
so
change
maybe
speed and doesn't change direction like Mercury, but it changes phase and position quicker than anything else.
And you see that quite tellingly from night to night. The moon will be with different star clusters from one night to the next, and it will be a little bit bigger or a little bit smaller than it was the night before in a way that is obvious to the naked eye. So there is that, the growing and the shrinking.
so changeability or changeable is probably a good keyword there for that.
Yeah, what's interesting though is it's not adaptable or flexible necessarily.
No.
And what's interesting is about the moon slows down a little bit and speeds up a little bit.
She does have a bit of a speed change.
But compared to the moon is the most consistent in motion except the sun. Every other planet changes speed
They have
much more
this
dramatically.
station.
And so, like you're moody, if you've got a bunch of stuff in Cancer or important things in Cancer, but you're consistently moody, right? Like it's not like that's, like that's how it goes.
Yeah.
It's not, there aren't sudden reversals in the same way.
That's true. Yeah. And I think with Cancer being, it is when it does have its change component, its changeability, if you like, it's usually with a specific goal or purpose in mind. And I think that's the difference between the cardinal quality versus the mutable, is that the mutable can just be changing for the sake of changing without necessarily, attempting to go anywhere. Whereas the cardinal is sort of changing with a purpose. Oh, the circumstances have shifted. We've adjusted our goal and now we're doing this.
Yeah, well, I would say
or
cardinal
it can be appealed to emotionally, whereas Gemini might be more changing as a result of an intellectual appeal.
Perfect.
Yeah, definitely. But
Go
yeah,
ahead, what were
cardinal
you saying?
sign wants to do something. Cancer wants to nurture, create, grow something. And so, it has to deal with the tides of the moon to do that, but it's trying to do something to establish comfort, safety, cultivation. Whereas like a mutable signs, in a caricature sense, they wake up and they're like, I don't know, what's today going to be about? I'll find out. Whereas a cardinal sign will wake up and be like, I'm going to try to do this today. And I will deal with what's between me and my goal. But that's different than like, mutable's like, okay, what is it? Tell me. And then I'll figure out who I'm going to be or how I'm going to react to that. They're reactive.
Yes. I like
Brilliant.
it.
All right. Any final words that we want to mention with respect to Cancer before we move on? Have we done a sufficient good thing, bad thing coverage?
Yeah, I don't know. Let's see.
Deep,
caring, moody, needy.
So
There sometimes can be a little bit of a cautious or a conservative, and then the idea of vintage or sentimental are some of the other keywords that can be relevant for Cancer.
yeah, sentimental is a good one.
But I feel like we've given it a good treatment.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Well, let's move on to sign number 5. So we have Leo.
Yeah.
Leo,
All the,
which is
radiance, it's like spirit fingers. It's like we need
Right.
a big bright sun to come on the screen.
I think your
Right.
Jupiter is going to have to handle this.
I
one,
know. I was
Kelly.
like, oh, that was me because I have Jupiter there.
So Leo is a masculine, fixed, and fire sign, which is ruled by the sun. And those are its 4 primary properties or qualities. So where do we start with Leo?
Radiance, maybe.
Radiance. Well, also just in terms of the sun, like the sun in the solar system is the body that all the other planets in the solar system revolve around.
It is the center.
The center of the solar system. So
End of attention.
The center of everything.
the center of attention, right? So the sun is like the celestial body that everybody sees every day, that everything else depends on. It's the most obvious because we have sunrise, we have noon when the sun is directly above head, and then we have sunset. So everything, it's the most visible, and that's a good one.
If we think about the astronomical components, there is a steadiness and a consistency to the sun's path through the sky that is quite unique. Like there is, you know what I mean? There's this sort of it doesn't change speed a lot. For instance, it's not varying off the ecliptic.
It's like 1 degree every day it moves forward.
Yeah. day in,
It's
day
the
out.
most consistent in motion and light of all the planets.
And we have the sun ruling a fixed sign. So we're going to really see that consistency. And whenever I teach on Leo, I always talk about my dad, who is Leo. And he is the kind of fellow that, even though I've lived in another country for 10 years, I can still tell you what time train my dad takes in the morning to work. And I know exactly when the phone rings at 5 to 5 of an afternoon that it's dad calling from a certain stop on the train line. And if mum leaves the house at that time, she will coordinate with his train to pick him up. They have a very traditional style of relationship, and he'll be home because his schedule hasn't changed in about 25 years. Even though there's been a couple of different companies along the way, he still keeps to the same hours and the same train schedule. That consistency, it's infuriating if you don't have a lot of fixed planets, for instance, because it doesn't change. But in the same way, that Taurus, the fixed quality gives both a positive and a negative. The positive of the fixed is that you can rely on it. But the negative of the fixed is that if you want to change it, good luck to you, because it's a bit of an immovable type force.
Right. So that can be good and bad. I mean, we have consistency or feelings of like one of the things that's really important to Leo is, I'm trying to think of the word, but it's like the importance of being true in like a relationship, or like stability, or like pledging your support, not just support, but like fidelity. What's the term I'm searching for? Where like in the
Not
negative
loyalty.
sense, loyalty. Yeah, loyalty is
Yeah.
super super important, and loyalty is
Incredibly loyal.
And that loyalty, though, is like an outgrowth of what you're talking about in terms of that consistency. Like loyalty is, pledging that you will have a permanent sort of consistency to another person.
Yeah, you can write it in stone, basically, if a Leo makes a promise to you, if you like. Because there's something because Leo is the sign of the sun, so there's an awareness of being seen. So it's not just that internal, I want to be consistent, but it's the awareness that I will be observed if I'm not consistent. So maybe it's the pride piece that comes in around, I want to do this, but I also want to be seen to be doing this.
Right.
So I don't want to lose in the public, if you like, because if you do have planets in Leo, you will be seen, or they will be seen.
Right. And sometimes that can have that's a positive thing in terms of being seen, but it can also be a negative thing in terms of, it's one of the first ones where we run into almost like an issue of appearances sometimes being like overplayed in some sense, or an overemphasis on appearance in a negative way, or a way that sometimes can be like a sort of shallowness in some sense.
Yeah, because the one thing, Leo is very sensitive to the feedback, the external feedback, basically. So they can sometimes attach to, they're looking for sometimes that external feedback rather than staying true to themselves. And I think because that's sort of the shadow side, the goal of the Leo energy, I think, is to find that authentic spark or that authentic light, and to express or to radiate that as often as possible.
Yeah, I agree. I think that if we're talking about fixed fire, right, we're talking about maintaining a fire, and fire is hungry, and you have to constantly feed a fire, right? That's just, it's just the way it is.
Yeah.
And so that, there's a question with individuals with a lot of, significant planets in Leo, where is that fuel coming from? Right? Is it coming from a depth of knowledge of one's, soul? Is it coming from, what's it feeding on? Is it feeding from likes on Facebook? Where, what is the fire feeding on, and what are you feeding the fire if you have planets in Leo?
Yeah. That's a really good point. And the fire image, I mean, we talked about the ignition of Aries, and I always think of Leo as like the hearth fire that burns all night. But you do have to make sure you fed it well so that you'll still have warm embers in the morning.
Right. You can't let the sun go out.
One of the other qualities that comes up very frequently with Leo is having this like regal quality. Like other synonyms are like royal, kingly, queenly, princely, but this like regalness to it, Where is that coming from symbolically, or what are some of the connecting themes that might be connected with that?
Well, I mean, sun.
It's the sun. I'm sure it's the sun.
The
Because the
sun
sun,
is.
mythologically, we talk about the sun when we talk about like Oriental and Occidental planets. We talk about planets like preceding the sun or staying up after the sun, with the image of the sun as the solar deity, the king, or well, it would have been a king historically.
Right. Well, no, that's
Yeah,
important. It's like the king. Like
it
if you
is.
were to assign, if you were to look at, and they did in the ancient world, like the planets, one of the analogies was like a royal court or like a society, like the sun
Yeah.
would be the king.
Yeah, Mercury can be the page and Venus can be the courtiers or what have you, but the sun is the king. And
Yeah.
so you do see a lot of that leadership quality or figurehead quality coming through with the Leo sign.
Right. And that's part of the performative quality of the sun in Leo is you have to perform leadership, like leading, like you have to inspire, you have to command confidence, you have to command which way things go. Like leadership is not something which is like quietly calculated in a quarter. It has to be performed. Right. And so, with Leo, we have, the rousing political speech, as well as, the Shakespearean play, as well as the bad reality show. Right. There's the performative quality is very important. I would also say one thing that doesn't get talked about as much with Leo is that it's actually a very physically vigorous sign. The sun has a lot to do with physical vigor. It rules, Leo rules the heart area, and then the sun also rules the spine. Like that's your cardio,
Yeah.
right?
Or that's zone.
The heart pumps the blood throughout the entire body, right? Like the
Yes.
sun. And so, you see a lot of vigorous specimens when you got somebody with sun and Leo in the first, like, you have like a vigorous, active, like strong and healthy sort of quality. And then that fire isn't just like, air can be just mentally active. It'll tend towards the mental, whereas fire is both mentally and physically active and yang or exertive.
Yes, I agree. You see that physicality in fire quite a lot, and the need for physical activity or physical movement or even work that might have a physical component to it.
Yeah, well, and you can't perform without using the body, right?
No.
If there's one, you can get up there and read the words to a lecture.
No, to
but
perform,
then,
you must embody.
right.
Yeah.
You listen, this, like you got to be there physically as well
Yeah.
as mentally.
Yes.
Right. So that sort of goes back to this idea of like that which animates other things, or it has this animating quality
Absolutely.
that is sort of
That's
central.
all sun stuff, I think.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
animation. Yeah. And it, the idea of generating things, because if we go back to our garden, nothing will grow without the sun. It's absolutely critical.
Yep.
Right. So it has the ability to animate other things just by virtue of being itself. And
yeah, it's an enlivening type of quality.
Right, enlivening. That's really good. Or like vivifying. Is that? I think that's
Vivifying is a good word.
Also illuminating.
Yes.
Right.
I don't know if either of you ever been to a one-man show or one-woman show where it's like, it's the most Leo thing ever, where somebody's like, let me tell you my story. And they kind of like perform, a piece that tells you a lot about what it's like to be a person and about living that life. It sheds light on, a whole course of experience. It's very Leo.
There was an astrologer once that I met that wanted to give a talk for a group I was organizing, and he wanted to give a talk just on like what it was like to be a Leo or what the sign Leo was like, and it was because he had like a stellium in that sign, and I thought it was just like the most Leo thing ever. That
this is like a clear Leo cliche come to life.
Yeah, right. Let me tell you what it's like for me to be a Leo. I'm sure everybody will be into it.
Everybody wants to know this, don't they?
Right. Yeah. So.
Well, I can think of two of my favorite sports people, which are obviously going to be tennis players, are both Leos, Pete Sampras and Roger Federer. And that staying power, if you like. But there's a strength to Leo that I think sometimes gets overlooked. It is fixed fire. It's focused fire. There's drive and determination. We are never saying die here.
Oh yeah. And it's a bestial sign. It's not a human shaped sign.
We didn't really talk a lot about these, but there is something in Leo where we operate from that primal instinct, which is the bestial part.
And I don't know if it's been stated, but Leo literally means the lion, or Leo means lion in Latin.
Yeah, I think we might have just assumed, but yes, we should state that.
But right. Yeah, with Leo, you've got, I would say Leo operates from me, but me, there are a lot of different me's. There's the me of the body.
Yeah.
There's the me of the emotional psyche. There's the me in a spiritual sense. There are a lot of me's. But Leo, so whereas Cancer spirals in and spirals out of the center, Leo radiates from the center, right? And that center is one of those me's or all of those me's. But it's radiance from a point.
Mm.
Right. So and that can have its positive and negative manifestations. I mean, the negative manifestations obviously are clear in terms of the potential for being like overly self-involved or something like that. But it's interesting seeing like a natural positive manifestation of that, of just centrality in a social sense, of being able to, just by being present, being able to like organize things around you, or having people organize themselves around you, and you being a centering force in a social circle, just by virtue of being yourself or doing things naturally.
Right. Which is absolutely vital to leadership.
Right.
Right. Being that organizing, intentional force. And I was going to say something. Hopefully I'll remember.
So shadow side, things like pride is a positive thing, but it being like overly prideful. There's like a specific term for that, isn't there?
Well, pride.
I mean, it's pride. I guess pride.
It is pride.
I believe in Latin, it's superbia is the sin. It gets translated as pride. The deadly sin is superbia, which is thinking that you're better than other people, which is different than feeling like really knowing and seeing the value of who and what you are. Right.
Yeah.
That's the positive.
That's positive.
That's the positive part of Leo.
Right.
Satisfaction from your achievements or something.
Right. And so the superbia, which is the actual deadly sin, is thinking you're better than, which is different from valuable in and of itself. I would also add with Leo people, the ones that I've known a lot of Leos that I know have this ability, because they're good at me, they can just point and say, that's who you are. Yeah. And that's great. Like there's an ability to be like, oh, you two are a star. I'm a star. Isn't it amazing being a star? You're a star. You're putting off nuclear radiation by the truckload. But they're like the like psychologically only minimally damaged Leos that I know can all kind of just do that. They're like me, and they're like you, us. We're all these things. We're all these radiant, great things. And there's a warmth and positivity when, as long as you don't have strong counterindications in a chart, you have that quality.
The ability to shine the spotlight on somebody else as a positive.
Yeah.
Illuminating again.
To use, their illuminating skills to illuminate something in you or in others, to recognize that essence of you-ness. Because I think one thing Leo does very well is, particularly the sun in Leo, for instance, is there's a real sense of this is who I am. These are my limits. There's a firmness. There's often a setting standards. It's sometimes in modern astrology just described as like it's the sign of luxury. But it's very much like I know what I deserve, or I know what I'm worth, and I won't back down until if you can't give me that, that's fine. I'm going to keep going. But there's a holding steady to that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, we've talked about a lot of positive qualities. Some of the negative downsides can be things like arrogance or self-aggrandizement.
My way or the highway.
Yeah. Tyrannical.
Yeah.
Sure.
I would also say thirsty. The sun dries everything
hungry.
out. Dude, Leos get thirsty. They're, it's like, oh, I need some more attention. Tell me I'm great. Click on my thing. Dude, there's total like thirstiness is dried out by this, dried out by that Leo.
Sure.
Super interesting.
What other, I mean, in the news, we've seen like a lot of like I saw some astrologers say there was a Leo rising recently that's like set Leos back a few decades, because we've seen
there's a very negative manifestation of Leo in the mainstream world right now.
Yeah, or
Sure.
I did this and it's great because it was me that did it.
Yeah.
Which is why
I can make everything great.
Which is why the sun is exalted in Aries, because Aries is like, I'm going to do something great and then you'll believe in me. Whereas Leo's like, it's great because I did it. Or
just, I am great. Therefore,
I'm literally the best in the world, or thinking that you're the best in the world.
Well, and also what you see with Leo people is if there's like damage, if there's like bad self-esteem damage, everything that they do is exactly as bad as they think they are. Like that internal self-image and valuing gets projected onto everything. Where it's like, nope, it's not great because I'm not great.
Yes.
And that's, that's
a whole that's a broken sun thing, if you like.
Yeah, it's just the flip side. If it's great because I'm great, is that it's terrible because I'm terrible.
Because I'm terrible.
All right. And we already touched upon this, but the sun, one of the associations with the sun that I always found interesting is the eyes and the ability to the sight, the sense of sight. And this is probably where some of the like sight visual type things are coming from, where in a positive sense with Leo, it's about, being seen and, being seen as important, but sometimes the negative side being like the overemphasis on the visual or performative aspects of things.
Status.
I guess status symbols, or the vision of status without necessarily having the substance underlying it, but the sort of appearances being more important almost than anything in some ways.
Yeah, I think that that visual component is super important. Seeing others, being seen, what does it look like? Performance, it's all there. And you got to see it through the right eye, right? Right eye is the sun.
Right.
Yeah, isn't the moon's the left eye, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the moon in Aries.
Although there's some that say, like Porphyry says, that it's flipped,
the other way
flipped
around
for men and women.
And
I have no idea if that.
But
works
that Porphyry, that's like that. He is that's what's the word? An exception to the rule. The vast majority of sources all over the world do sun right eye, moon left eye. And that's in astrology, that's in a bunch of stuff. You'll find that in esoteric Taoism, like it's just everywhere. It's in Egyptian mythology. The sun and moon are like the right and left eyes of Horus. Like sun and moon, sun right, moon left is almost universal with a few important points of disagreement.
Yeah, I mean, and that's part of a broader thing that sometimes comes up in ancient astrology, that there's sometimes questions about in modern astrology, which is, are certain things flipped based on gender, and is that true? Is that actually true in practice? Is that still appropriate or not? Like, Mars, Venus stuff sometimes is said to be flipped based on gender. Different questions surrounding that. That's a whole can of worms we don't necessarily need to get into, but it's one of those things that exists as an interesting conceptual as well as practical issue still nowadays.
Yep.
Yeah. All right. We'll save that for another podcast. So, anything else we need to mention about Leo before we move on and go to our final sign?
I don't think so. I mean, we could do like a brief wrap up, like leadership qualities, performance qualities, strong, radiant, attention hungry, egocentric, that's relatively balanced.
I just want to leave it on a positive note because I don't want to get a bunch of hate mail.
I said 4 nice things and only 2 negative things.
Okay. All right, then I think that's good. Are you
I
good,
mean,
Kelly?
Leo gets the word radiant. So I just think there's, the potential for good is definitely the scale skews that way in this sign, all other things being equal, which I understand in many cases they're not, but yeah.
I would also add honest.
Yeah.
There's a very particular flavor of Leo honesty.
Mm.
And so, and then, because it rules the heart, right? Speaking from the heart, which isn't,
From integrity.
which isn't necessarily like sophisticated and smart, like speaking from the brain.
No,
But
it's more primal.
yeah.
This is probably connected with something that Kelly and I were talking about a little bit back, which is like the signification of like fidelity being associated with Leo and like faithfulness to a person, and themes of like loyalty and support and allegiance and even like obedience being very important for Leo.
100%, 100%.
Yeah.
And so it's, it's the heart. And we skipped it on Cancer, but Cancer is like the upper chest. Like when you're like, oh, I have a feeling, you clutch the Cancer part. If you're like, oh, I'm offended, and you clutch your pearls, which are the stones of the moon, you're clutching the Cancer part, right? Cancer is that upper chest feeling. And then Leo is more little bit further down, right next to the diaphragm in the solar plexus.
There's a little bit of an issue sometimes there with the assignments, though, because it's like in order, if you're going from the top to the bottom, it should be like Cancer, then Leo.
Yeah, that's what I just described.
That's what you just described. However, there's an inversion where Leo is assigned to the heart, but Cancer is often assigned to the stomach.
To the belly area.
I think that's conflating two different systems. So there's planets and organ systems and signs and organ systems, but that's different from body sections. There's an overlap between those two, but there's like body structure, but then there's function, and organs are function, whereas the top down is structure, right? So in Cancer also refers to the breasts, obviously, which are on the chest, but it also refers to a certain degree to the womb. Mars speaks to the adrenal glands, but rules the head and the genitals. I think you need to deal with the organ function and the body structure area things as two separate lists that combine at certain points. One is like inner part of the body, one is like outer structure.
Sure. And that's a good point. It's funny. It's surprising that we didn't mention that with the breasts for Cancer, because that then ties in directly to the nurturing aspects of Cancer, basically.
Well, the breast and the belly, because the belly is where we take in the food.
Right.
Yeah. So
Brilliant.
It's the giving and the receiving of essential nourishment.
Brilliant.
And
right. The first waters.
Yeah. And when you said that, just made me think of my sister's baby, who's this very healthy Taurus baby that is just being breastfed and is growing like gangbusters.
So I have Jupiter and Cancer on the rising, and I was an extraordinarily heavy baby, because I was like a dog. I would just eat until I couldn't eat anymore. My parents left me with like a sitter for the first time when I was 2, and I gained 10 pounds in 2 weeks. Because
Did they leave you for 2 weeks?
Or maybe it was a week, but I like gained 10 pounds because she was so excited. She was so excited that I was delighted to eat whatever food she gave me.
Which is atypical of a 2-year-old, because they're often quite fussy, or they want this and they don't want that. So,
yeah, not me.
Yeah.
Just mash it up and put it in my face.
But Cancer rising is going to be, and Cancer rising does have this, it comforts itself through food. Planets in Cancer will often seek food to comfort, and they can have issues with that as a result.
Yeah, I was probably emotionally eating because my parents were gone for the first time.
You were.
Also, I have Jupiter there, and Jupiter is a good eater.
Yeah, well, Pisces rising or Sag rising have issues with lack of boundaries too.
So Cancer is something which grows and thrives when it is fed.
Well fed.
Which is interesting, because which can be overdone, of course, but then there's an interesting thing with Leo and the sun there, where it's something that grows and thrives when provided with attention.
Yes.
And can sort of wither in the same way that Cancer, if it's not fed, can sort of wither without having that sustenance or that nourishment. Leo similarly can kind of wither when it's not given this sort of attention that it sort of that it desires or that it needs on some level.
That's a good point. Yeah, that's the you got to keep both of those torches burning, right? The night torch, Cancer, the moon, it's a different kind of torch. You got to feed it emotionally and physically, but you got to feed Leo psychically. But you're right, like they're both hungry in their own way. And which is interesting because they both provide the most light, but you got to fuel the fire, even if it's a moon fire.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, that is really interesting because they both emit light, and that becomes part of their underlying meanings as well, like the ability to emit light and to illuminate things, but then they require that as well in some sense in order to thrive.
Yeah. Yeah, totally.
Okay.
No free lunch,
Right. All right.
no free
Awesome. Well,
light.
I think that is good for Leo. So why don't we move on to our final sign, the sixth sign, which is Virgo. So Virgo is a feminine sign. It is a mutable sign. It is a earth sign, and it is ruled by Mercury. So this is our first one that we get to where it's ruled by. It's the first sign that we've come to where it's ruled by two planets, or it's two signs ruled by one planet. So we get to see some of the other manifestations of the same planet, and there's some similarities or overlaps, but it's also manifestations in a different way in some sense. We see the other aspects of Mercury coming through Virgo.
Yeah. And so let's just start with the body, right? So once we get down below the solar plexus, we've got guts. And Virgo rules the guts. It rules the breadbasket, right? It rules the ability to assimilate and digest what you've taken in, which is exactly what it does on a mental level as well, right? This is yin Mercury, which is like, I hear you. Let me break that down and fact check it.
Yeah.
Into its like smaller components, and that's one of the
Smallest
interesting
pieces.
things.
Right. And you
Right.
figure out what's good, like what's food and what's shite.
Waste.
You know,
Yeah.
yeah, we don't need to keep that. You know, I read his book. I liked the way he did this and that, but you know, this part was garbage. It's like, you know, it's separating or discriminating between, between what's good and what's bad, what's worth keeping, what's not worth keeping, what's smart, what's stupid, what's true, what's false. Because again, we're back at a mutable sign, which is dual.
Yeah.
Right. And this sign more than any other sign seems to deal with that which is small, which we touched upon already with Mercury ruling Gemini and being opposite to Sagittarius ruled by Jupiter, and this division between that which is small and that which is large. But Virgo even more so seems to deal with that which is small, and you've already touched on that with digesting things, because in order to digest something, part of the process of that is breaking it down into its smallest possible components so that it can be digested. But there's other ways that focusing on that which small manifests in so many different ways with Virgo, even in really funny, like sometimes negative ways, like being nitpicky is like a Virgo trait. And that's like focusing like on the details or overly focusing on the details in some sense.
Yeah.
100%. Yeah. Yeah, Virgo is very obsessed with the minutia, if you like. One of the skills of Virgo is that it's able to assess and analyze and break things down into those components, so that Virgo has a really great kind of diagnostic skill around this little tweak here or this little change here is actually going to have quite a big impact. So Virgo is really looking for an improvement around efficiency. So to make a system or a process, take less time and still achieve the same result or require less resources. And the difference, with the Mercury, like the nighttime yin version of Mercury here, the earthy nature of it, I always think of this as applied Mercury. In Gemini, we've got Mercury that is just really interesting, to learn things and to act on things. And here in Virgo, we've got that reflective analysis going on to synthesize or to do the sorting the wheat from the chaff, which we have in the small intestine, which is the very Virgo part of the body. But it's what we're doing. We have to be, I think one of you guys used this word, discerning or selective. So we're assessing things, good quality, not what I'm after. And we're constantly, moving things out or putting them into the right place.
Right. Even though it's a mutable sign and it's a Mercury ruled sign, that earthy component of Virgo seems to remove a lot of the like flighty qualities that we get in Gemini more, and there's much more of a almost like substance and still almost like a slowness that still comes in with Virgo. I don't know, maybe slowness isn't the right term. There's some term I'm reaching for there.
There is a steadiness that Virgo has because it's the only earth mutable sign. It seems a
Right.
little more stable relative to the other mutable signs.
Yeah, I would
Right.
agree with that.
like programming, like one of the things you were talking about just now, Kelly, it made me think of like programming as like a Virgo type thing, like programming computers or something like that.
Well, when I think of Virgo, I think of editing.
Yes, it's
Because
my
it's like
favorite Virgo word.
Gemini says all of the words, and Virgo's
Yeah.
like, okay, we can get rid of this paragraph. This
Yeah.
sentence can be half as long. Let's think about using this word here. It's just going to come off slightly better. Virgo fact checks. Gemini just says all the things.
Yes.
And then Virgo's like, okay, well, so let's, and like you said earlier, break it down, right? That's what the intestines do. And when we're like, okay, let's stop and really get into this and take it apart before we put it back together, right? Let's break it down, right?
Yeah.
Like, and that's what Virgo does, is it breaks it down into its component pieces, looks at their relationships, decides, when you're looking at a process for efficiency, like you mentioned, Kelly, right? Like, let's break down how, our the way we're managing our time. What are we doing here? Does this feed into that?
Yeah. Yeah. And the other word that I often think of with Virgo is the mechanics of things, which is kind of what you're talking about there, Austin, where you pull things down into their pieces just to make sure that it's all working well or to see if it can be made better. And one of the downsides of Virgo, of course, is that idea of not being able to save the forest for the trees, because they can get, unfortunately, a little obsessed on this little bit of the bark here and they miss the larger picture. And we could bring in the Virgo Jupiter polarity again.
Yeah.
Same as the Gemini Sag.
Yeah. I mean, the Virgo trap is getting stuck on that tree and forgetting the forest. I remember long time ago in college, our layout editor for the paper we were doing was a Virgo moon guy with lots of Virgo stuff. And the other editor was making fun of how detail oriented he was, and was like, she was like, yeah, because he had carpentry as a hobby. And she was like, yeah, I can just imagine you there sanding a table leg until it snaps in two. And he like kind of looked funny for a second, and he's like, I've done that.
Yeah.
And so
forgetting that if you make this piece so perfect, it will destroy the integrity of the entire table.
Right. Or just trying to get that one part perfectly smooth, you end up with no leg.
Yeah.
And that's the Virgo trap. And just about Virgo being a mutable sign and therefore being reactive and flexible. When you put something in front of Virgo's like, how does it work and how can I make it better?
Yeah.
What's not perfect about this that I can change? It's a reacting to what's placed in front.
And that's adaptability.
Yeah. And it's sort of like, okay, well, let me take a look at this, right? My knee hurts. Well, let me take a look at this. Well, you got some swelling here. There's some discoloration here. If you move it this way, does it hurt? Right. Virgo.
Yeah. I do think there's a very genuine desire inside the Virgo archetype to improve things. So they're nitpicking and they're nagging, or that, that can come across in a very critical way. They do. There's the dryness of Virgos. It's just very much like, this will make whatever it is better, whether it's your problem or our problem or something about me. But that's one of the difficult traits of Virgo, is that perfectionism and that self-criticism. Which is very, very strong.
I got to tell just a very brief anecdote. So Kate, my wife, has Venus in Virgo, and a significant amount of the time when we go get like takeout food, she will then spend 10 minutes improving it on the stove. Like, she'll be like, these quesadillas aren't exactly right. And she'll like crisp them up a little bit, or like, yeah, I really like their spaghetti or whatever it is. We don't order a lot of spaghetti, but and then she'll be like, yeah, I'm going to add a little bit of oregano and then maybe a dash of hot red pepper, but she'll be like, yeah, this is the food I want, and I'm going to make it better.
I love it. Yeah. Yeah.
And it is better when she does that.
Yeah. And that's I think we do have to be fair to Virgo, because they cop a lot of slack, a lot of crap about being so pedantic and critical, but their suggestions or their input have great value. And, it's definitely worth taking on board.
Right. Definitely. So that discerning quality is super important. And there's other keywords like synonyms that go along with that, which are like discriminating, astute, intelligent, selective. And then that helpful component that, like, what is that? It's like a helpfulness or a desire to help and to
They
play a
do like to be
supporting
of
role.
service. Yeah, service, helping, supporting, even a bit of like healing, not in a sort of a mystical way, but you often see Virgo planets having an inclination towards medical or health professions in some capacity. And so there is a very genuine desire that's very humble. You know, in Leo, we wanted to be seen, we wanted to be acknowledged, we wanted to be adored. And in Virgo, we just want to help.
Well, in Virgo,
Right.
it's like, let me fix it.
Yeah.
Well, in doing it and then not getting credit for it necessarily, or not necessarily even wanting credit for it, but just doing it
Virgo
for the
doesn't need
sake
the
of
credit, it just wants the job well done.
Well, the sun in Virgo does because it's the sun.
That's true,
The
the
sun
sun, but-
always needs to be seen.
But that's specific to the sun in Virgo. I don't think the pure energy of Virgo itself needs
No, it's a very
knowledge.
objective orientation. It's like there's a, I fixed it.
Yeah.
Now it's good.
Yeah.
Now it works perfectly.
Yeah.
Like
Right.
that's
having
the pleasure.
satisfaction in that.
Yes. That's the
Or-
satisfaction and pleasure.
Or like
Having it, no, that's good. Having like getting a feeling of satisfaction from fixing something or optimizing it so that it's
Mhm.
running it at full capacity.
Optimizing. That's the Virgo word. Yeah.
Sure. So before I forget this, because I've been meaning to mention it for a while, it's often in a modern context, in like a new age context, it got tied into like ideas of like evolution and spiritual evolution, and that doesn't really sit well with me, and that's not the religious or philosophical context that I approach it from. But there is something about the signs of the zodiac that we can see as we're going through them in order, where the sign that follows after the previous sign, there's always some sort of like corrective or some sort of modification of the quality that's directly related to, and you can see as almost like a change and a shift in the previous quality. And I don't know how to fully take that. I want to take that outside of like an evolutionary or spiritual context, but there's something going on there, and I don't know fully how to frame that. How do you talk about that? Is that something you've addressed when you try to teach this, the idea? Because sometimes it gets abused in saying that, Aries is the youngest sign and Pisces the oldest sign or something like that, which is a little bit weird. But there is some sort of like almost developmental component as you go through the signs of the zodiac, at least when you treat them in pairs, of seeing Leo and its sort of self-aggrandizement or its focus on the self sometimes, or which can sometimes be egocentric.
we could say maybe self-actualization.
Yeah, self-actualization versus, let's say, Virgo, and there's sometimes being this like sense of selflessness associated with it.
World optimization.
Right. I mean, I don't know. Kelly, is that something you...
Yeah, I
ever-
get the point that you're making, and I do think it's true. And I agree with you that it's a little hard to kind of put into words, which is that piece around how one sign is so different. It's almost dealing with the, like, say when Leo runs amok and we get too much, we get an excess of Leo, the Virgo is like a counterbalance to that.
Right. It does
Yeah.
almost like counter it, and so some of the qualities are like almost countering the ones of the previous sign.
The circle has to stay balanced, right? Like, so you have to have balance within that system, or else it's not a circle anymore, right? Like each sign, you have to have signs neutralizing signs, or else it's, it goes off in a direction rather than staying a perfect circle.
So maybe that's just part of what we're seeing as a byproduct of like the 3 or the 4 primary underlying qualities, and what happens when you're alternating from one to another and going from a feminine sign to a masculine sign, and going from a fixed sign to a mutable sign, or going from a fire sign to an earth sign, and some of the things that happen as a result of that.
Yeah, because it wouldn't hold together as a system if it weren't balanced, right? But the idea is that it's the zodiac doesn't change; it's balanced.
Okay,
And
I
go.
just really quickly, I just realized what it was. It's because it goes back to the aspects and the idea of like aversions and stuff, and it's because like the counter qualities are the ones that it's so starkly different, because you're switching from the idea of aversion of signs that can see each other or aspect each other, that they have some affinity because they share something in common. But when you're alternating and you're moving from one sign to the next, those two signs that are in Hellenistic astrology, they would call them in aversion. The idea was that they share none of those affinities. So they don't share any affinity according to gender or element or modality. And so that's part of what we're seeing here is we're seeing it contrasted so differently when you're jumping from one sign to the next because they don't share anything in common.
That's a great insight, Chris.
Yeah. Absolutely.
What were you going to say before I rudely
I can't remember
interrupted?
because that was really good. No, I was interrupting you. It'll come back to me.
Okay. Let me know when it does and just interrupt if I'm in the middle of saying something.
No. That was you made a really good point about the aversion piece there.
Well, it's something that's dealt with in some of the 20th century astrological literature rather well, and like people like Rudyard deal with it. It's just that this idea of there being like a cycle or a movement through the signs of the zodiac and a sort of developmental phase or a growth, but they often, because of the like New Age or because of the theosophical background, would put it in the context of like 19th century ideas of like spiritual evolution coming from like Madame Blavatsky and stuff like that. And I was just trying to figure out a way to, because I think there's an element of that that's still there, but I'd like to remove it from that sort of spiritual context, perhaps.
Yeah, well, I think it's a wheel, and that if you learn things as you go around the wheel, then we could call that evolution. But you can also fuck it up worse and worse every time. And you can also just kind of hold her steady. I don't think the nature of the wheel is evolutionary. I do think it's the context of the development that people call evolutionary, although I don't really like that term. But that's the playing field, but it doesn't do the learning or development for you.
Right. Or even just with the seasons, there is a cycle. There's a circle of like growth and development.
Mm-hmm.
There is. And decay, growth, development, decay, and then rest.
Right.
And I think, because winter is the rest, right?
Well, and then rest ties it in also to the diurnal circle of morning, sunrise, sun culminating at midday, sunset, nighttime, everything's resting or everything's asleep, and then it wakes up again in the next day.
Yeah.
Well,
the rest is critical.
Some of you might be asleep.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
know you guys usually aren't.
Yeah.
And I think, what I was going to say is, these are sort of 12 types as well. So they have to be somewhat distinctly different as we move around, just to hold space for the different iterations, if you like.
Right.
Yeah, that's a really great point.
So I think we should address the symbol of the Virgin, because it's a little weird. We got lions and crabs and bulls, and then here's a virgin, right? And so this is the virgin of the fields, or the maid. Virgo will get referred to. It's the idea of like the virgin wheat, or the crop before it's been harvested. Which, by the way, don't try to eat wheat without a ton of processing, right? Like all of that Virgo, like the separating of the wheat from the chaff. Yeah. Right. That's, you take the virgin is the thing as it is, and that's what begins the Virgo process of taking, of processing, the raw wheat into a delicious crusty loaf of bread. So many steps, so much processing. It's not necessarily a sign of chastity. That's not really what they're talking about.
No. So it's about the processing to take a raw, rough diamond or wheat or what have you, and what the steps that it has to go to. So it's more like virgin in the sense of like extra virgin olive oil or Perfect. What have you. Yeah. Right. The raw, unfiltered, original state.
Well, and knowing when it's time to harvest it, when something has reached that, whatever the age in which it's time to harvest it, like that's what you're saying at the beginning.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. And that's discernment. When is the, if you do any cooking, like when is the meat perfectly done and not overdone and not underdone? What are the signs, right? It's earth, right? Like, oh, you get this one smell and then the juices run in this particular way. when is it time to, take it off the heat?
It makes me think of, teaching my stepkids how to cook chicken. They're like, how do you know if the chicken's ready? I'm like, you stick a thing in this particular part of the chicken under the leg, and when the juice comes out of here specifically clear, you're safe. It'll be all cooked. But that's just an example, I guess, of what you're saying, Austin, is the steps by which you go through to know when something is ready or ripe or, it's at its opportune moment.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
So it doesn't upset your small intestines, which
correct.
is Virgo.
Right. Before I forget, I just found the word I was looking for earlier with that idea of like the development of the signs, and it's corrective. There's each sign following a sign seems to serve some sort of corrective function in something that was happening in the sign that came before. So we saw this with like Aries and that impulsiveness, that impetuousness, which then just gets slowed down so radically when it comes to Taurus. Or we're seeing some of we talked already about the self-aggrandizement or the focus on the self and with Leo versus the helping of others or subverting the self in order to help others with Virgo. There's some sort of corrective function that each sign that follows a sign seems to serve. And I think that was the term I was searching for earlier.
Yep. It's a good way to put it. Corrective.
Corrective.
Yeah, corrective is a beautiful word.
Sure. All right. Where are we at? Did you guys time this one for? Are we at 20?
This is all we're doing today.
Oh, I feel like
this is the end.
I feel like we've done close to 20 minutes on this one.
I just want to make sure we didn't shortchange Virgo.
Heaven forbid.
Yeah, let's do a little positive negative then on Virgo.
Positive, negative, positive. Like one of the most helpful people I've ever met, just genuinely helpful, had at least like 3 planets in Virgo or had a heavy Virgo emphasis. And he was just like one of the most inventive is a good one, but it's there's a similar term related to inventive, but he was just one of the most genuinely helpful people I've ever met. There's another guy that you and I both know, Kelly, who plays a support role for astrologers, and I think he has a heavy Virgo emphasis.
I know. Yes, he does.
Super Virgo chart. And not just a support role, but in a very technical way. The level of detail of the kind of work that this person does is sometimes mind-blowing, actually.
Yeah, and that's really crucial because it's like behind the scenes, but he's playing such a crucial role, and that then ties back to that idea we were talking about earlier of editors. We were focusing on the editing role, but there's almost something as part of that archetype as well of the important and crucial role that's behind the scenes, that they don't get the credit. They're the ones, maybe they get mentioned in a byline as like thanks to my editor or whatever, but they're playing a super important role in shaping and improving things in this supportive capacity, but it's not necessarily recognized, or at least they're not at the front of the lines. They're not the one in front getting all the glory or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, there'd be the unsung type heroes. But yeah, the editor is sort of one of my favorite positive manifestations of the Virgo energy, because I do think the improvements that a good editor contributes to a body of writing are phenomenal and impossible to tell at the end of the day. So it's like they come in and they make it better in such a way that you can't even know that you don't even know that they've been there, like Santa's elves or something.
Right. Leave no fingerprints.
Yes. Yeah.
In my book, I had to, in my acknowledgements, my last acknowledgement was to thank my partner, Lisa Scheim, who has the moon in Virgo. And it had been my book, it's like a 600 or 700 page book, but it had gone through just like multiple layers of edits by like 2 or 3 different people over months and months. And we thought it was done. We typeset it and I handed it to Lisa to check out in the last like week before publishing. And she just found like tons and tons of typos that we were going to overlook and commit to printing if she just hadn't like read through it in the last week or 2 before it was published. And there's just that ability to notice the details, to notice the small things that stand out to you because you have this unique ability to see that other people might overlook or might miss. Something about that.
Yeah, totally. As many typos as I'm guilty of, there would be far, far, far more without Kate having looked over a bunch of my stuff.
Oh my God, I just realized we all have partners who have personal planets in Virgo.
That's funny.
Because I always get Peter to proofread my stuff too. And he'll often, he'll not just do the line edits where it's like this word, and his grammar skills are phenomenal. So he'll be like, you need to change this phrase, or you've used the wrong tense here, whatever. But he'll also do the structural type edit where he'll be like, you've gone off track here, or this piece doesn't connect to this piece type of thing.
And I believe the person who edits this podcast has a Virgo moon as well.
There you go.
Oh, does Stephen?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. So shout out to all the wonderful editors in our life, because we wouldn't be able to do what we do, or to the level of quality. Like, that's the thing. The Virgo is doing the quality control, and the people that you see have the support of the Virgo behind the scenes, which helps improve the quality of their output.
Right. And
quality,
on a general
that's a really
note,
good one.
On a general note,
quality control.
Like, a lot of people have Virgo planets, but they have other stuff. And sometimes your quality control parts can get in the way of your being brave enough to put something out there parts.
That is a beautiful way of talking about the problems of the perfectionist.
Yeah, like having an eye like that means that you have an eye like that for the flaws in everything you do as well.
Yeah.
And so that's a gift curse. If you're a person who also wants to be, seen and putting things out there to be seen, and you have that Virgo eye, you're like, I can find 8,000 problems with this.
It's funny. Speaking of other helpers, my wonderful assistant Katrina has a bunch of planets in Virgo, and we were talking the other day, and she's like, but I procrastinate. And I'm like, yeah, procrastination is actually a Virgo trait, in that sense that it doesn't come from a lack of willingness to do something, but it comes from a concern that what you're trying to do is not going to be good enough. It's not going to live up to that standard you have. And there's this they get stuck in I can't even get started because I haven't figured out the whole plan, or I can't conceptualize how it will be perfect. Therefore, I must not start until I've got that plan. And that's one of the challenges of Virgo planets run wild, if you like, is to figure out or to learn that you can take the first 2 steps even if you don't have an entirely perfect plan in full.
So perfectionism as the potential downfall.
Yeah.
Yeah. And how that manifests and how that can interfere with what Austin's saying about the expression of their own ideas or their own genius, if you like.
Right. So it's funny because there's sometimes like overlap with Saturn, sometimes can come off as almost Virgo-y, but there's this idea of pedanticness, of being pedantic or like scrupulous or precise or exacting. And that's commonly something that comes through with Virgo, but sometimes it can be like a Saturn type thing as well.
Yeah, there's some Venn diagram overlap.
Yeah, and I think specifically Mercury-Saturn aspects are very much about the standards and the rules of language or the rules of mechanics, whatever it happens to be. But there's definitely crossover. And I mean, I'm sure Austin and I would just say that anyway. Not necessarily, we wouldn't just say it anyway, but
yes, having Saturn
in Virgo. I mean, my husband and I sometimes have arguments about the words. Like, he's like, this is a better word for that. I'm like, no, I'm trying to say this. And then the argument is about the word, not whatever we were actually discussing. And that's the kind of stuff that Virgo does on a Saturday night.
Yeah.
All right.
Word nerding.
Good times.
Oh, that was a good one, Chris. Okay, what else do we want to say?
I feel like there's got to be. So, is there anything? Have we said enough? We said enough. We said plenty of positive things. Have we said enough negative things about Virgo?
Virgo's already very aware of the negative.
Yeah, they don't need us to help point them out. No, right. I mean, the phrase I often say is paralysis by analysis for Virgo. Yeah. So it's the overthinking that can lead to inaction. And not every person with Virgo planets relates to that, but many do. But Virgo, as we just all expressed our love for Virgo editors,
right?
They're actually wonderful, even if they think they're not. Everyone else thinks they're exceptional.
What's because one thing I want to be careful about is not relegating Virgo entirely to a support role. What's a manifestation of Virgo when they are the front man and not playing the supportive role?
World famous brain surgeon.
Beautiful.
That's good.
Yeah.
The
technical mechanical. So working with gadgets and things.
Yeah. Also, they're totally finance Virgos who are very good at accumulating and multiplying money.
Yeah, that's a good one. Virgo, and there's like Mercury, it traditionally actually had a lot of like mercantile
Business.
and business
Yeah.
and some like banking connotations.
And money has only gotten more mercurial over the last 50 years.
Yes.
It's not gold coins changing hands. It's numbers and growth rates and interest, and it's all mercurial math time now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, with credit rates and interest and things like that. That's all very incredibly
Mercurial.
The way it's complex, and the way that large finance packages are put together. Very, very
Sometimes
mercurial.
some good musicians. I know some musicians that have a lot of like Virgo risings, like Donald Glover, Childish Gambino has Virgo rising. Billy Corgan, Kurt Cobain, of course, famously were born within like a month of each other and both have Virgo rising and very similar chart placements, although slightly different. Paul McCartney has Virgo rising.
Yeah, Freddie Mercury, Sun, Mercury, and rising, all in Virgo, and Whitney Houston is Mercury in Virgo as well.
Right.
Yeah. So there's something about the technical proficiency that Virgo has that can lead to excellence in a variety of fields because of the proficiency that Virgo gives.
Right. And speaking of technical proficiency, the two founders of Apple Computers, Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak, both had Virgo rising.
Lovely.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Although Wozniak's was interesting because he also had Mercury in Virgo, and of course he was the actual programmer at the beginning.
Yes.
Whereas Steve Jobs was the front guy, the
more of the ideas creative person, and then Wozniak made them.
Well, and Steve Jobs was also the Mars and Aries guy.
Yeah, he's very, very combustible.
Yeah. And his was modified by having like Mercury in Aquarius. This is like an important thing, maybe worth mentioning for everybody looking at this in terms of their rising sign, that your rising sign and having that as a certain sign of the zodiac will be important in terms of character traits for you, but then it gets modified very heavily by what sign the ruler of the ascendant is located in, and modifying those energies and sort of blending them in some ways. So that's a whole separate topic, though. I think we did it. We made it to the end. It only took us 3 hours, but we made it through the first 6 signs of the zodiac.
Excellent. Yay.
Yeah, this was awesome. Thank you guys so much for joining me today. This was a lot of fun.
My pleasure.
We're going to return again next month to do part 2 and finish up the next 6 signs of the zodiac, right?
Indeed.
Yes.
All right. I will be looking forward to that. Both of you teach intro to astrology courses or have different like modules where you go more into depth with the signs of the zodiac, the planets, and other basics in astrology, right?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Okay.
I have a 6-week class called Practical Astrology for Beginners, I think. And that'll take you through, actually in the first module, we're doing signs and houses. So if you want more on that, that's what I have as my basic program. And Austin, what do you have?
I do 4 weeks on planets, 4 weeks on signs, 4 weeks on houses, and then 4 weeks on like 5 other things. But that's the fundamentals class.
Yeah. Perfect.
Brilliant. And I address and teach all of this through my course in Hellenistic Astrology, as well as my book, Hellenistic Astrology, The Study of Fate and Fortune, available at fine bookstores everywhere. And I actually forgot to mention in our last forecast episode, I finally just released it as an ebook, and you can get it through Google Books. So go to HellenisticAstrology.com/book, and you'll find a link to the Google Book version, which is now available for everybody who's been demanding for the past couple of years that I release an ebook version. All right, guys.
Congratulations.
Thank you. We did it. Thanks so much. This is awesome. Thanks everyone for listening. I hope everybody enjoyed it. Let us know. Thanks to all the patrons who support the podcast and to make this possible each month. Couldn't do it without you. And yeah, we'll be back again. I guess we'll be back again in a couple of weeks to do the forecast episode.
For November.
Brilliant. All right. Well, until then, I'll see you guys again next month for part 2. I'll put the link to that in the description once it's available. And otherwise, that's it for today. So thanks a lot for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.